Good evening, everyone. Welcome. This is the February 7th, 2023 meeting of the Carrboro Town Council, and we are going to start today with poetry reading, as usual. So I think we have a special guest today. Our poet laureate, Liza Wolfe-Francis, has invited Chapel Hill's poet laureate, Cortland Gilliam, to do today's reading. So I want to welcome Cortland up to the podium.
Thank you. Okay, so the piece I want to share, and I hope this is not too somber of a way to start off a meeting, but as likely we all know, there's been a lot of heaviness in the news, a lot surrounding our country's current and present and, seemingly ever-present struggle to change our culture of policing, of white supremacy, of racial violence and terror in this country. And so the piece that I had in mind, as we were entering into Black History Month, is this piece that I wrote during the summer of 2020, during, all the uprising of that season. And this piece grew out of me struggling for words of how to kind of connect to and respond to some of the questions and outreaches from some of my peers, my friends. These are white friends of mine, primarily, who were making certain outreaches and trying to extend care in that very difficult time. And there's a lot of questions of how are you feeling in this moment? And my kind of way of engaging was always how are you feeling in this moment? Because for me, that experience of witnessing racial terror as we're, experiencing again, is not new, and the conditions for that are definitely not new in this country. So this piece grew out of an attempt to kind of address and respond to all of my friends in kind of one fell swoop. And so this is a piece entitled A Letter to Allies of New and Old. And part of this piece, I'll say, is inspired by the work of Black queer feminist scholar Christina Sharp. She has a book called On Blackness and Being. It's entitled In the Wake on Blackness and Being. So check that out if you're interested. So this is a letter to allies. And can y'all hear me? Can I just? Okay, thank you. Dear allies, I'm glad to have you on board, but please never forget that this is an escape boat. It is a life raft severed, suspended, a sacred salve of wreckage from a cause long lost, abandoned. This is no cruise line, nor a search boat even. There are no saviors here, only survivors. There's no going back. There's not even a back to return to. No, this here is a one-way trip called freedom, to a land free from the conceits of liberty, a land far free from this current condition, far closer to a human one. There is space for you there too. For you here, maybe. They say it was written that many are called, but few are chosen, to which I like to add who actually choose themselves. You see, all of us already on board are just grateful to be alive, to have not been capsized by the waves reverberating in the wake of that original charter called conquest. You see, we here are hurting, yes, but we are not hurt. I need you to understand that we are hurting, but we are not the hurt. There is more to pain than its infliction. Know that. And while consolation is certainly welcomed, it's not because it gets us someplace, not because it makes us feel better, gives us some sense of hope. No, we are well aware that we are mid-sea. No shores in sight, just 360 degrees of endless blue, resting sites for dreams and bodies. No, we're well aware that we all may die out here in this small space that none of us asked to share. And yet, for as long as I can remember, we've been doing just that, sharing. caring for one another, praying over one another, being here for one another, valuing the lives of those who made it as much as the lives of those who did not. Here, consolation is community. It is welcome in practice because we know that we have to find a way to live out here. Whether these souls see solid ground again or not, we have to find a way to live. So, welcome aboard. Be prepared to get intimate. Understand that there's nothing to be fixed here, only felt, only presence, only being, learning, living, loving. There is not enough space for your good here, nor your guilt. And while it warms me that you're here, I need you to understand that you have to be here for you and not just me. I need you to see that this aftermath and afterlife, this divine, disparaged living is far greater than the one lost with that cause. To be here must mean that you made it off, that you did not go down with that ship of shame, that parting with what you were did not kill you, at least not the parts worth holding on to. Know that the reasons you've gotten on board do not have to remain the reasons you choose to stay. Know that staying is not wholly your decision, not wholly within your control. Know that this here is a home. So welcome home. May we all live long enough to see you become fellow passengers of this plight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't want to say too many words other than that, but just, carry that spirit forward in all the work that you do. This is me trying to join in the collective chorus of civil work in the way that I know how, with the written and spoken word, and I'm appreciative of all the work that you all are doing for the town of Carrboro, and thank you for the invitation today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Cortland. I do have a proclamation. Thank you so much, Liza. See you next time. I have a proclamation to read, and I wonder if Anita Jones-McNair would mind joining me at the podium. Thank you. This is, as Cortland mentioned, Black History Month, and back at the end of last month, I issued this proclamation for Black History Month, as we do every year, but also as a way to highlight programming that the town has been putting together for this month's occasion. So I want to thank our town staff for all of the programming that they've been doing, and our our Recreation and Parks Director is here, Charles Harrington, and thank you to you and your staff. So I'll read this proclamation and share this with Anita, who is our Chief Race and Equity Officer. Whereas Black History Month grew out of Negro History Week, which was established in 1926 by historian Carter G. Woodson of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. And in the earliest observances of Negro History Week, Dr. Woodson reported that North Carolina was among a small number of states whose departments of education, quote, sent out to their teachers special appeals for cooperation in this important celebration. And whereas Black people have played and continue to play significant roles in Carrboro's economic, cultural, spiritual, and political development, and whereas Black leaders in Carrboro have included several elected officials, including Alderman Braxton Foushee, Carrboro's first Black elected official, who served from 1969 to 1981, Robert Drakeford, who served as alderman from 1975 to 1977 and as mayor from 1977 to 1983, Alderman Hilliard Caldwell, who served from 1981 to 1997, Alderman Henry Hank Anderson III, who served from 1993 to 1998, Alderman Joel Hall Brown, who served from 1999 to 2011 and who currently serves as a district court judge for Orange and Chatham counties, Alderman Michelle Johnson, who served from 2011 to 2017, and Councilmember Barbara Foushee, who has served since 2017. And whereas Black people have played leadership roles as employees of the town of Carrboro, including Richard Knight Jr., who was the first Black person to serve as town manager from 1976 to 1980, and who later became the first Black city manager of the city of Dallas, Texas, and Richard J. White III, who has served as our town manager since 2021. And whereas the Carrboro Community Park was renamed the Henry Anderson III Park in honor of the late Alderman Hank Anderson, Baldwin Park was named for Henry W. Baldwin, a local Black community member and landowner, and Martin Luther King Jr. Park, which opened in 2020, features murals and plaques that honor Dr. King's life and legacy. And whereas the town is proud to recognize and celebrate Black people and Black history in Carrboro and across the nation during Black History Month, and whereas the town is committed to advancing racial equity and has recently taken several actions in support of this commitment, including joining the Government Alliance on Race and Equity in 2018, and in 2019 establishing a racial equity core team of employees who are leading the way toward equitable systems change across the organization. Unveiling truth plaques at Town Hall and on the site of the former Freedmen's School on East Main Street to acknowledge the ties of the town's namesake to racial segregation and other truths about Carrboro's history. Adopting a resolution in June 2020 to advance racial equity in law enforcement and public safety in Carrboro. Adopting a resolution in support of reparations for Black Carrboro in October 2020. Providing racial equity training for town employees beginning in January 2021, and for members of the town's advisory boards and commissions beginning in June 2021. Establishing the Racial Equity Commission in January 2021. Establishing the Community Safety Task Force in April 2021. And collaborating with the other jurisdictions in Orange County to develop the One Orange Racial Equity Framework. And adopting the Carrboro Connects 2022 to 2042 Comprehensive Plan with race and equity as a foundational theme. And including funds in the fiscal year 2023 budget to conduct a disparity study that will inform changes to the town's procurement policies to increase opportunities for minority and women-owned business enterprises. And whereas local celebrations of Black History Month this year will include, and some of these have already begun, but I'm going to read them anyway, because there's a great series of programs going on in town. Local celebrations of Black History Month this year will include a Black History Month concert series, a performance of the one-woman stage play, The Spirit of Harriet Tubman, a history lecture, Black Resistance, focusing on the Freedmen's Conventions, part of an ongoing event series titled Celebrating Black People in America, and a poets open mic held via Zoom. And whereas in addition to the scheduled events, the town will host a month-long youth art exhibit on the Carrboro Recreation Parks and Cultural Resources Department's website, 28 days of Black history trivia and inspiring quotes, all shared via the town's social media channels. And whereas numerous other celebrations of Black History Month will occur around the Triangle, a listing of which can be viewed at, there's a link in the proclamation that I won't read out. And whereas in May and June of this year, the town will again partner with the Music Maker Foundation to host the Freight Train Blues concert series in its celebration of local music legend and Grammy Award recipient Elizabeth Cotten. Now, therefore, I, Damon Siles, Mayor of the town of Carrboro, North Carolina, do hereby proclaim February 2023 as Black History Month in Carrboro, and encourage all residents to participate in local Black History Month events and to learn about and celebrate the lives, history, and contributions of Black people during this month and throughout the year. And that was the 31st day of January. Thanks, Anita, for being here, so we can celebrate Black History Month. I don't know if you want to share any remarks, or I just want to present that to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Siles and the Town Council for all of the work that you're doing to advance racial equity and celebrating Black community members and celebrating all members in terms of the diversity and equity work that we're doing across the town. So I appreciate all of this, and thank you.
Thanks. Any comments from anyone? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Barbara?
So, thank you, Mayor, for the proclamation. Black History Month certainly is every month. It's a time to celebrate our very rich history. We are American history. But for me, it's also a time of reflection. You know, I've faced some challenges here lately, both personally and professionally. And it's kind of woke me up again. I consider myself a pretty woke person. Really have to be a Black person in America. I think about people like Vice President Kamala Harris, Congresswoman Valerie Foushee, and right here at our front door, Dr. Naya Hamlet, who was recently challenged about her PhD work. These are women who have ascended to high positions and are still challenged and oftentimes not seen. I would like to read Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man because it's about not being seen. I am an invisible man. No, I am not a spook like those who haunted Edgar Allan Poe, nor am I one of your Hollywood movie ectoplasms. I am a man of substance, of flesh and bone, fiber and liquids, and I might even be said to possess a mind. I am invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. Thank you, Mayor.
To recognize Elisar, who, as you all know, is wanting to introduce a resolution regarding recent events around disparagement, once again, of queer people in North Carolina. So, Elisar, you have a resolution that you shared with us and included with the agenda, which should be in front of us. Do you want to summarize it for us or read the whole thing, or it's up to you?
All right. Hi, y'all.
What's up, Posada?
So, a couple of things that I want to mention before I read portions of this resolution. Sitting here in this month, after the last week, I'm not even sitting here, I'm standing here, is it's difficult. As I already mentioned, not only are we struggling with hatred against minorities of color, or people of color, not only are we suffering with the continued abuses against Black folks in this community, continuing to see atrocities by people who are supposed to be keeping us safe. I've had to dedicate, and not just myself, but many people in the state have had to dedicate the last week to standing up against hateful, harmful legislation that has no place in any civilized society. We've had to organize at a moment's notice to tell our elected officials at the General Assembly, some of our elected officials in the General Assembly, that queer people, queer youth, are part of their constituents, are part of the people they're supposed to be protecting. And as someone who has struggled with my identity, and I think you all know this, but I want to tell you anyway, I am proud to be an openly gay Latino. I'm proud to be an openly gay Latino elected in this state. One of the first in the South to be able to say that. And having to move mountains to get people from the mountains of North Carolina to the beaches of North Carolina to come to the General Assembly and let our legislators know that bills like SB 49, like House Bill 43, have no place in our state or in our country. And I'm exhausted because from this morning at 8:30, I was in the General Assembly trying to do the best I could to ensure that SB 49 did not pass the Senate, but as of a couple of hours ago, it did. And this is a bill that was introduced less than a week ago. So not only that, but over the last year, we've seen so much violence against our LGBTQ community here in North Carolina and across the states. So I won't read all of the bill of the resolution, but I will read a few key whereas clauses. First, whereas Carrboro has a proud history of advocating for the rights or advancing the rights of LGBTQI plus people, including adding sexual orientation to the list of characteristics protected by the town's equal employment opportunity policy in 1990. Being the first municipality in the state to create domestic partner registry in 1994. Being the first to elect an openly gay mayor in 1995. And later elect the first lesbian mayor and the second gay mayor and a gay Latino to the town council. Being among the first to support civil marriage for same-sex couples, including LGBTQ families, in comprehensive immigration reform. Being one of several local governments to oppose General Assembly discriminatory Senate Bill 2 in 2015. Being the first to call for the repeal of discriminatory public facilities Privacy and Securities Act of 2016, HB 2. And being among the first with the towns of Hillsborough and Chapel Hill in Orange County to adopt an ordinance prohibiting discrimination in public accommodations employment based on sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression in 2021. Whereas hate crimes targeting LGBTQ people have increased every year. Therefore, be it resolved that Carrboro Town Council affirms the civil and human rights of all of our LGBTQI plus community members. Be there further resolved that we condemn all violence and hatred against LGBTQIA plus people, LGBTQIA plus spaces, and LGBTQI events. Be it further resolved that we stand in opposition to SB 49, House Bill 43, and all legislation that erodes safety, health, civil, and bodily autonomy of LGBTQ people, including minors. Be it further resolved that the town clerk is directed to send a copy of this resolution to our North Carolina General Assembly delegation and leadership. This, the 7th day of February 2023. Colleagues, I didn't want to get this emotional, but I am tired of this. And after an exhausting week, I don't have the energy or the will to hide my emotions. I please urge you to support this resolution. I know that I've spoken to everyone and continue to be advocates for our community.
Thank you for reading those portions of it, Eleazar, and for standing up in front of everyone and talking through it. I know it's hard to get up there sometimes. I'm going to take that as a motion by Councilmember Posada to approve this resolution. Is there a second? Seconded by Randy. All in favor of the resolution, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Matter passes unanimously. We'll join the long line of resolutions this body has adopted over the years, as Eleazar summarized, when these bills come up. I appreciate all the work that Eleazar and other folks at Equality North Carolina are doing, and other organizations around the state to fight these bills, and hope that the veto-proof majority stands in one of those in the House. Okay. Mr. Clerk, why don't we move on to announcements of upcoming meetings, please?
Good evening, Mayor, Council. I got a couple upcoming meetings for you here. First up, February 8th, we have the Arts Committee meeting at 6 p.m., and that will be held on Zoom. Next, we have the Stormwater Advisory Commission meeting on February 9th at 6:30 p.m., and that will also be held on Zoom. And then on February 13th, we have the Recreation and Parks Commission meeting, also on Zoom. And then next week, we have our next town council meeting is next week at 7 o'clock. That's all I have.
Any other upcoming town meetings to be announced? Randy and then
At
Susan.
a town meeting, I have the North Carolina Department of Environmental Equity and Justice Advisory Committee meeting on Thursday this week.
Susan?
Yes, I just wanted to add, I appreciate the mention of the truth plaques in the resolution, and the Truth Plaque Task Force will be meeting tomorrow, Wednesday, 6 o'clock here at Town Hall. And the Truth Task Force's next plaque will be for the historic Strayhorn home, which was built around 1875 by former slaves Tony and Nellie Strayhorn. So very exciting to get this underway.
Thank you, Susan. Tomorrow morning at Durham City Hall at 9 a.m. is the monthly meeting of the Durham Chapel Hill Carrboro MPO Board. Any other meetings to announce? Okay. All right. We have a few folks signed up to speak on matters that are not on our agenda. So I'll start with them. And just remind folks that we do ask people to keep to about 3 minutes, no more than that, and I'll have a timer and all that, and wave you down when the time is up. First up is Makita Mott. Is Makita here?
Might be in the front.
There she is. Welcome, Makita. Makita, as you know, we ask folks to keep to 3 minutes. Clock is running, Makita. Okay, next up is, on the list is Michael Paul. Welcome, Michael. Thank you, Wesley.
Trying to get this in 3 minutes. Buckle in. Hi, my name is Michael Paul. I'm a Carrboro resident. I live at 702 Bowling Creek Drive, and I'm an ecologist with more than 30 years' experience studying aquatic ecosystems, especially streams, with specific expertise in urban streams. I'm speaking because I hear you may have a working session to discuss paving a path along Bowling Creek. I sent you a lengthy letter in 2016 detailing the scientific arguments on how impervious surfaces alter stream ecosystems, on the science around the importance of floodplain forests, among the most sensitive and important ecosystems in any watershed, and on a variety of other technical points pertinent to this discussion. I brought a copy of that letter tonight for the manager to copy and distribute. The scientific arguments against pavement and floodplain forests is well detailed. But additional factors have arisen since that time that add to arguments against paving. Look at any map of this region, and it's so easy to pick out Carrboro because in a sea of urban and suburban development, there is this large, intact green space, Bowland Forest. Around it lies a landscape fragmented by roads and development that's destroyed habitat for untold species requiring intact forest. The proposed path would fragment this last remaining forest. Moreover, if it is to provide school transit for kids, then paved paths will be required from every neighborhood, down the steep slopes along both sides, and across bridges that would be required to reach the main paved path. Bowland Forest, Pathway, Spring Valley, Tripp Farm, Rock Garden, Traymore, Ironwoods. Who will tell a neighborhood they can't have a paved access path? So the forest will become fragmented by these paved single-lane roads as the neighborhoods around it. Why does this matter? Surely you've heard about the biodiversity crisis we are facing. It's all over the news. We are losing habitat and species at an unprecedented rate: birds, insects, including pollinators, amphibians, reptiles, even mammals. And this species loss is making us even more susceptible to climate change and disease. At a time when we should be conserving and expanding intact forests to protect biodiversity, we're considering further fragmentation. In the recent Carrboro Comprehensive Plan, we elevated environmental justice as an important value, one shared by the U.S. government in its infrastructure spending bills that require EJ consideration. Is our infrastructure money going to be spent for the communities in this town who need it the most and have been most neglected? As a member of the Stormwater Advisory Commission, I have asked that we look at mapping our spending on stormwater infrastructure and floodplain protection with indicators of environmental justice like those provided by the U.S. EPA's EJ Screener tool. We have yet to see the results, but in my humble opinion, the communities that would benefit from this path from Claremont to Ironwoods are not those with historically limited stormwater and floodplain protection investment. There are several reasonable alternatives that use or complement existing infrastructure that would be easier and safer for commuters, children, and would also protect our unique intact forest, water quality, the quality of water supplies downstream, biodiversity, and the climate, while providing for more equitable infrastructure investment. It would be a win-win-win. But these very technical issues and options cannot be discussed in social media 280 characters at a time. This requires a transparent, thoughtful, and deliberate effort. Carrboro was promised a public process in 2016 when the conflict arose over the first phases of this paved path, and more than 1,000 citizens opposed paving. Dozens and dozens of them spoke out against it in this room at this dais for long hours. I hope the town is not going to consider a paved path in this floodplain forest and along Bowling Creek. But if they are, then I think we deserve the deliberate public process that was promised to discuss all the impacts and sensible alternatives. Thank you.
Thanks for using your time well. Right. Thank you, Michael. The next person on the list is Diane Robertson. Diane, welcome.
Deja vu all over again. I was here for the first time on this matter in 2009 and still here on the same matter. I'm Diane Robertson. I live at 405 Waterside Drive in Carrboro. I've lived here for 31 years. The science you just heard from Mike suggests a very different question than we have been asking: to pave or not to pave along Bowling Creek, but rather, what is the best and most responsible use for this precious, limited, and unique resource, our urban forest and creek. This resource can be described as the lungs of Carrboro and our community. The forested land of our community sequesters approximately 9,276 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year, a data point I received from town staff. I dare say that most of the residents of our town have a point of view about what is happening in the Amazon in Brazil, as roads are built to gain access to the amenities of the jungle. Some of you have taken strong stands about mountaintop removal to mine coal. Yet to engineer a road along Bowling Creek would be similar to those practices. In 2009, I addressed this body about the damage an impervious surface alignment along Bowling Creek would create. Then the discussion was focused on water quality, erosion, and ecosystem destruction that would undermine habitat for all that is supported by the forest. Yes, those are still concerns. But since then, we know more about the need to be resilient in the face of environmental challenges from climate crisis. When I spoke to the mayor last week, he was not on the council in 2009. The term that he used was kicked the can down the road. I think that turned out for the best for the forest and all served by the biodiversity that the forest supports, because we know more now, and we have observed extreme impacts of eco-destruction from fires out west to extreme flooding in river and creek-rich areas of the southeast, which includes areas of North Carolina. Hemming in the creek with a hardened road in a floodplain is reckless. Carrboro could be on the cutting edge of what is best for this resource based on the values articulated to address climate and equity noted in the new comprehensive plan. Policies that are formed less by politics and the loudest voices, but aligned with the values, in this case, the best science for the highest good. The best science for the highest good. I continue to hear the old saying, think globally, act locally, and the Hippocratic Oath, what doctors agree to in regard to the care for their patients, do no harm. In this case, we, the community, are the caretakers, the physicians, that we should adopt this kind of thinking. That what we do today is not just for us, but for generations yet unborn. We are living with the consequences of short-term plans and actions. We have a chance to do this, to do something different. The environmental, social, and fiscal cost to construct and maintain this project, which is primarily for recreation, cannot be justified. I leave you with this. It is not can we engineer the forest, but should we?
Thanks very much, Diane. All right. Mr. Manager, we'll move on to the consent agenda, please.
Thank you, Mayor. The first item is the approval of the May 10th, 2022 minutes. The second item is the Police Department Quarterly Equity Report. The purpose of this agenda item is to provide the Town Council with a brief overview of the Quarterly Equity Report for the third quarter of 2022. And the next item is the Affordable Housing Advisory Commission funding recommendation. The purpose of this agenda item is for the Town Council to consider approving recommended funding for 2 nonprofit affordable housing applications to the Affordable Housing Special Revenue Fund. The next item is a resolution supporting an application for Safe Routes to School non-infrastructure grant. The purpose of this agenda item is for the Town Council to consider a resolution in support of an application for the NCDOT Safe Routes to School non-infrastructure grant. And the final item is a resolution supporting an application for Triangle J Council of Governments FY24 Transportation Demand Management Grant Program, Triangle Transportation Choices. And the purpose of this item is for the Town Council to consider a resolution authorizing submittal of an application for Triangle J Council of Governments FY24 Triangle Transportation Choices Grant Program.
fingers for, okay, here we go. We have number 1, number 3. All right, did somebody say 2?
We're going to need a puller.
Or the police department? Yes. Okay. So what about number 1? Is that one of,
Yeah, I had a quick question.
okay, so 1, 2, and 3. Is there a motion to approve items 4 and 5 by Susan? Is there a second? By Barbara. Moved by Susan, seconded by Barbara, that we approve items 4 and 5 in the consent agenda. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Randy, item number 1.
Yeah, I just want to ascertain that the language I offered for, to amend the May 10th minutes were accepted, that everyone saw them, and that if we approve those minutes, it's with those changes.
It is, and it's also with some amendments as offered by Councilmember Romaine as well.
Thanks, Randy. Would you move that
I'll
item?
move the minutes from May 10th, 2022.
Is there a second? By Danny. Moved by Randy, seconded by Danny to approve item number 1 on the consent agenda with the amendments noted. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Number 2 is, I believe, Barbara.
Yeah, so I had, I didn't send it to everybody, I guess. I think I just sent it to Mr. White. But I think I previously mentioned that whenever these quarterly equity reports come from the police department, my preference is to actually have Chief ATAC to present this data with context and be available for questions. Since it only occurs every 3 months, so.
Mr. Manager.
Yes, he's available and has a PowerPoint, I believe. Yes.
Okay, welcome, Chief.
You know, you're always welcome. Just show up.
Try to navigate this, so give me just one moment. This is a strange order. If anyone sees police department before, there we go. It's not even there. That's very bizarre. I put it in there this afternoon, so I apologize. I don't know if we want to move on to something else. I can rectify that technologically and come back in a second, but I'm going to have to disappear for a minute.
We have.
We have one more item we can do before you come back.
Okay, yeah, let me go
Take you
fix
just
that.
a
I don't know
couple
why
minutes.
that's not there, but it was there earlier, so.
Right, why don't we hold on that one while the chief finds his presentation, and we'll move on to item number 3, which I think was Sammy.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Manager, I just was interested in understanding a little more about the weatherization for the various projects that we're being asked to approve of funding for tonight. And along with that, you know, I'd like for it to just be included in the materials as something for the AHAC committee to use as they are making their recommendations. That information be compiled and included for them. And forwarded also, like with the other materials, so that we are abreast of that, especially in light of the efforts that we're undergoing for weatherizing, you know, a significant number of affordable homes in our town. But for tonight, I just, if there's information about these specific homes, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, we do have an update on the weatherization. Anne-Marie Vanneman is here. We can offer that.
Thank you. Welcome, Anne-Marie.
Good evening, everyone.
Evening.
Good evening.
The home, I'll back up a little bit and just kind of go through what happens when these homes are assessed. The homes come through the Orange County Home Preservation Coalition, and when they are assessed for whatever repairs are needed, they are also evaluated for weatherization needs. Typically, the work that we've seen the most is conducting weatherization on a crawl space as well as an attic. So for instance, the crawl space will receive a vapor barrier on the ground. Any openings or leaks are sealed. and a minimum of R19 faced batt insulation is installed between the joints. The attic will have all of the old insulation removed and replaced with blown insulation at least an R38U value. Ventilation is maintained or it's improved, and the attic stairs are also insulated. That's going to be happening to one of the homes in here, the Starlight Drive home. The other home had a communication error between the two nonprofits who were submitting funding requests for this. So that home will have the same work done on it, but with the ARPA funds once that rolls out. So it will have the same. The Starlight Drive home is also going to have an HVAC system installed. And so each home is also evaluated to see how their system is running, because that will definitely improve the performance of the unit and save energy. Then there are smaller repairs that often happen, replacement of windows and doors with better materials, closing the leaks, etc. So that's very typical. I believe in the application, this information was buried in a work scope. So I'm going to work with the manager to find a way to present this information in the abstract so that it's front and center, and so that it is indicative of the town's commitment to climate action.
Thanks, Anne Marie. So just for me to be clear, are there two homes being addressed here?
There are two homes.
Okay. And so you're saying that the one that isn't having the attic or crawl space will be addressed?
It will be addressed.
And I'm wondering about to what degree there's work, if this work is with like Doug Jones's outfit, he's the one doing the work?
Yes, he
Okay,
is.
great. Great, thank you so much. I appreciate the information.
Certainly.
Thanks so much, Anne Marie.
Thank you.
Sam, would you move the item, please?
Yeah, with that, with gratitude to staff, I'll move the item.
For a second?
Second.
Seconded by Randy. Moved by Sammy, seconded by Randy to approve item number 3, I believe that was. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The matter passes unanimously. I also saw Braxton in the background, who I remember is always reminding me to speak up. I don't speak loud enough, so I'm going to be better about that, I think, tonight. I'm going to make that one of my goals for the evening. Braxton, it's good to see you. Chief ATAC, you're back on board.
I apologize. Let me get up here before I run my mouth. Apologize. The file that I put in there is a PDF, and it does not appear to register when you read it from this computer, but it is there. So I've moved the PowerPoint over, which is the same information, but it seems to like that format better. So this is how you learn things. So I apologize for the delay.
It's a phantom PDF.
So this is my computer, and I just moved it, and it showed it there. I don't know if there's some strange IT quirk going on.
Chief, can you refresh the view in that window?
Yep, that might be the way.
Maybe right-click on that window and
Let me close it and just reopen it again.
Leslie, bring it up.
When in doubt, refresh.
Right.
Uh-uh.
Literally, I just opened it in this folder from my computer. So it's there. I don't know why it's not there. So I apologize. I can do the old school, we have the acetates. I can hold them up and then discuss them if you wish. Or I know it's less than ideal in a lot of
You want
ways.
to do it next week?
I mean, we can do it next week.
So why, what do you?
It's a work
do you think?
session next
Oh,
week,
that's
but if you want to
right,
add
'cause we
that
have
on.
Two
the
weeks.
bowling.
In 2
That's
weeks.
right. That's
We can be
right.
back on the 21st.
Yeah, I'm fine with that, as long as, I'm okay with that.
Okay.
Thank you.
I don't know, and now I'm academically curious why.
You're going to figure
you've made
it
us very
out.
suspicious of you, Chief.
I am very suspicious of my.
Yeah, there's a little
guys,
su-
I'm going to sit
little
back.
Something's up.
suspect,
Something's
Chief.
I'm
up.
going to fire this up again.
Put one of your detectives on
Barb-
this
Barbara, would
mystery, Chief
21st,
Agent.
it's fine.
Leslie, you don't have a copy?
Thank you.
Not showing up, I don't know.
So Barbara, would you move that we,
Could I ask something, though, related to this item?
sure. So Chief ATAC, I think Councilmember Slade might have a
Yeah,
question.
sorry, I should have caught you before you sat down. The Community Safety Task Force at their second to last meeting was interested in the data for, it's not very clear exactly what, but I understand you're working with Caitlin to get 911 call data. And so our next meeting will be when it happens, like the first Monday of every month, so in a month's time. If you could work with Anita to maybe get something so that the the Community Safety Task Force can get a sense of like what that data might look like, and thereafter hone what it is that they want. We're very appreciative of it, along perhaps with this quarterly report. I think those two things would address their interest. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sammy. And it sounds like, Mr. Manager, that I believe that Anita's already been working as well on collecting some of that data for the task force. So we'll have data for folks to look at. Yeah. Barbara, can you please move that we consider
Mayor,
this item? Yes,
one moment.
Mr. Manager.
It's in the agenda packet. We're trying to see if we can find it up here.
That's what I was saying.
Is that the presentation you were looking for, Chief?
Yes.
Oh, okay, we had that with our agenda materials.
I work with a team. I'm not a soloist.
Great, thanks, Wesley.
Yeah, Wesley, you watch me.
You figure it out.
If you have a moment, look in that folder. It's there. Yeah. All right, so I apologize for the excitement, but that is my fault. I'll try to figure out why that is the case. So, good evening. Nice to see everyone. I apologize for the delay. So, quarterly since about the middle of 2019, the police department has been providing these kind of breakdowns of traffic stop reports and such. So this is the Q3 iteration, which is July, August, and September of 2022. The final quarter of 2022 is still almost there, so that will be just on another date. First slide covers what we call residency tracking. Most of what we encounter in Carrboro is not just Carrboro people. So what this tries to do is capture the population that we're interacting with through the police department and through our traffic stops. So as you can see and it's updated yearly based on the data. So you can see for 2021, we don't quite have the 2022 data, but roughly 30% of the people we encountered on traffic stops were actually from Carrboro. So that 70% was from some conglomeration of other locations. And the bigger ones, of course, you got Chapel Hill, Chatham County, Durham, looks like Orange County, Wake County, Alamance County. There's an other, which is 15%. So that's what is statistically, from our analyst perspective, an aggregate of a population. That generates the weighted population estimates that we see here. Again, it's estimated demographics based on the folks we interact with on a traffic stop, if that makes sense. So this slide looks at traffic accidents where you had drivers, and there's an issue with the data. I'll explain it to you here in a minute, but I'll give you the overview. So what this was an attempt to capture those folks that are involved in traffic accidents and gives you for the first 3 quarters of 2022, basically based on the driver's race. Now I will tell you from the data perspective on the race for white, there is no ethnicity breakout from that data. That's just a limitation. So that's going to be white non-Hispanic and white Hispanic. So that's going to be a little problematic there. But it gives you kind of that percent of drivers involved in traffic crashes.
And Chief, that problem applies just for the traffic accidents or throughout?
So I think the general DMV data doesn't pull out for ethnicity, so it can be problematic. But I think for the traffic stop report, which is a separate form, it does.
Okay.
Does that make sense? And there is an effort, recently DMV has they've updated their traffic crash reporting, but I don't know if that captures that evolution of being able to break it out from an ethnicity standpoint. Okay, I can find out for you because I don't know myself.
Can you hold
Yes.
on for a second?
Yes, ma'am.
Is A African American? Is A Asian? Is B black?
Yeah, thank you. Good question. So A is Asian, B is black, I is Indian, and W is white. Yes. Does that answer your question?
Asian, black, Indian.
So this is the overall stop rate for Q3. So there were 339 traffic stops in that 3-month period. And this is just the racial breakdown. And then the percentage pie chart over here to the left.
Chief, in the future, could we track these historically over past quarterly reports within an individual report?
You mean year to date?
That year to date would be a good start. I think it would be ideally, just kind of the way that we had, goes back to 2017 for residency tracking, probably not that far is necessary.
Right.
But however many data points could fit on a second slide.
Okay. So year to date for the current year, is that what you're? Let me clarify.
Well, going back,
The trend.
the trend, yeah, essentially,
Okay.
I mean, I would tend to think probably 6, 8 reports, over the past, that gives us what? Since these are quarterly, 2 years?
Before a year, so
Right.
6 to 8 reports would be 2 years, yeah.
Perfect.
Yep. Okay. Yes.
I don't do the same thing with that one.
Oh, Chief, sorry, I think another thing that would be helpful, you broke down the estimate relative to where people are driving from
Yes.
and the percentages. Like if we had a tiny pie chart, so that, looking at the slide, we could compare
Side by
what
side.
what that wheel means relative to the demographic that's driving through Carrboro.
Okay.
Thank you.
So this is the aggregate of the reasons for stop. So this is part of that SBI 122 form, which is the traffic stop report. So this is the one that does break down from an ethnicity standpoint, the white or Hispanic. So this is for quarter 3. So there's a total of 339 stops. You see the grand totals are kind of running at the bottom there. These are the reasons for stop listed on the form. So this is a state SBI generated form. So these are the reasons that the officer can choose. So DWI is suspicion of DWI. You have equipment and regulatory, which is a very broad term, and we'll talk about that kind of more in depth in just a minute. Investigative, if there's some sort of possibility that vehicle is involved in a crime. Other is another category, which is just not captured in these specific ones. Safety could be equipment related, could be the way the vehicle is being operated. Seatbelt, pretty clear if there's someone, an occupant who's not wearing a seatbelt. Speeding, self-explanatory. And then stoplight violation. So this form was created in 2001, I believe, when they first started reporting traffic stop data from the state and requiring officers to do it. So here you have the breakdown on all of the stops. To the left here, you have the chart showing, again, you have the Asian, Black, Hispanic, white breakdowns and the numbers. You see primarily our stops. We have a significant number for speeding. Second on that would be equipment and regulatory, followed by safety. Did you have a question, sir?
Yes, can you give me an example of what would be an other?
Right. So the example is if you had a stop that didn't meet all of these criteria. So let me try to conjure up in my mind without. Let's just say you had. Well, that would be investigative. I'm going to have to think about that. Let me think about that because I've never personally used the other category. But it basically, the legal standard for stopping a vehicle is reasonable suspicion.
Mhm.
So if that officer had reasonable suspicion that vehicle was either had committed a traffic offense, or was involved or about to be involved or had been involved in some sort of a criminal act. So that would be as long as they meet that legal standard. The form here, we've got 4. I can find out the officers that checked other and find out for you because I don't stop a lot of vehicles these days and I don't think I've ever checked other, but I can find that out for you.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to know what some of those examples would be. You don't have to call out each of those.
Well, I mean, there's only
One
4,
is-
so I can
yeah.
I can dig into the data. I mean, generally for the most part, we have very small numbers, and sometimes, I think it was about a year ago, we dug into the numbers from the charging perspective, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But off the top of my head, no, I'm not coming up with another. But it would be any other category of a lawful stop that doesn't meet these pre-existing. It's a catch-all for if you don't have these. Let's say, well, I mean, as an example, any other, if you had someone who maybe crossed the center line, someone who ran through a stop sign. There's a stoplight, but there's not a stop sign. Would that be another? Possibly. But I'll find out for you because I'm not, again, I don't stop a lot of cars these days, but we can find out.
If I remember, we changed our policy so we weren't prioritizing equipment and regulatory. And so I was wondering what accounts for so many in that column. I understand also that if the primary reason was something else, then some equipment and regulatory would be addressed in those, but it wouldn't necessarily be for the primary reason for stopping someone.
Right. So the policy that went into effect January 1st of last year of 2022 was a conglomeration of policies created by the Governor Cooper's Task Force on Racial Equity as a model policy, combined with Fayetteville PD had adopted a policy under Harold Medlock back in 2013 that specifically focused the enforcement on a safety-related and de-emphasized the equipment and regulatory that was not specifically related to traffic safety. So our policy kind of is a mishmash of that, and basically it says, and I've got the policy here, we talk about shall concentrate, and then on the back should not stop for, and it's multiple instances of the very minor regulatory and equipment violations that were concerning. So talking about without a light, defective or improper equipment, with a brake light out, with an exhaust system issue, certain sun shading materials, tinting, etc. So it explicitly lists in the policy what we should not be stopping for. And what I'll tell you is quarterly, what I do is there's a state system, it's called Brazos now, but it basically tracks all of the enforcement actions from the officers. So I have that quarterly report printed, and you can do it by list and by race and by breakdown. So we print it, we look at it, we get all the charges together, and we look at it to make sure officers aren't violating the policy by citation, right? Because again, to your point, if you're speeding and then you have a regulatory, the policy specifically is like, yes, you can enforce that, but the recommendation is the warning, et cetera, if it's not a major thing. And that's, that's again explicitly listed in the policy. There are equipment and regulatory violations that are still serious, right? We talk about insurance, if you have a car in front of you with no plate, stuff like that. So you will see the more serious equipment and regulatory stops still show up. But yes, but you will not see, I'm not saying you will not see, but I check it quarterly. And we have had a few violations. So we we get back to the supervisor, we get back to the officer, hey, clearly a policy, not a go. And, we have people that have to learn sometimes, and they're trained on it. But the expectation is when you see an equipment or regulatory stop now, it's not a minor stop. And we have this, that policy was put out specifically to provide direction to the officers on what their focus should be, which is primarily traffic safety. And again, there are equipment and regulatory concerns that can rise to the level of a safety concern if unaddressed, right? And the challenge is if a car has 2 of 3 brake lights out.
Right.
Well, technically, by policy, we shouldn't stop the car, but the reality is if it has 2 of 3 lights out, we only have 1 active stoplight. Well, at some point, it's reasonable to say that light could go out. So do I want an officer to hesitate and say, well, the policy says this, but it could be a safety? I'd prefer we stop, say, hey, you've got 2 brake lights out, we need to get this fixed, as opposed to just overlook it. And that's that delicate balance that we're trying to strike, because again, the equipment and regulatory, when you look at it from a study perspective, does not particularly influence safety directly. Now again, it can lead to concerns with safe vehicle operation, but more of it was kind of I'll use the word petty, but it was a small time kind of stuff, and we want to get away from that, one, because of feedback, but also from the data, and everything shows that it's not really conducive to, one, traffic safety, and it's not a particularly, from the community feedback has been in the direction.
Thank you. If a future report, if you could just include kind of since that, like a comparison of pre-policy, post-policy, so that we might be able to see what the effect is in terms of changes and stops for that reason. I'd appreciate it.
Yep.
Thank you.
You can do that.
And on that, since you're already going in and looking at, some of where those are, not these serious violations, I would like to see like an asterisk at the bottom of this or something that says, when we reviewed these, X number were determined to be non-serious. And
You're talking for the equipment and regulatory?
yes, because you mentioned you go there and look, okay, maybe this is something that we need to follow up on. I don't want to know every action you took, but I would like to see if there's some way of, for this quarter, we looked at it and there was 53 equipment regulations and 52 of them were serious and 1 of them was not. I would like to see kind of something.
So that's the analysis I kind of pull and look at quarterly, and that's what you see. Sometimes you do see 1, and then we follow up with an officer and be like, hey, follow up with the supervisor, because the primary emphasis is on the officer's decision-making, the second is on the supervisor. The onus to make sure that the officers are corresponding to the traffic stop policy. So that is part of that ongoing thing, and we can try to asterisk it now. I will tell you from a data perspective, that can be a real challenge, because we may have the traffic stop report, and the numbers may exist somewhere, but it will actually take somebody communicating to that officer and trying to go back and reconstruct, unless they issued a citation for it, a warning, or unless there's a documentation of that. If I go out now and I stop a car, there's they have 1 brake light left, and I stop them. It will show up as a traffic stop. I'll complete the traffic stop report, so that will exist. But nowhere does it list specifically what that is. The only way that would manifest is if I issued a written warning, or if I issued a citation. So that data is going to be a little tricky to pull, if that makes sense. But we can look at it.
Yeah, I just want to I just want to see this policy in action, basically, right? Of course, I want to see the historical data on it, and that should give us kind of like a concrete number. But I would also like to see the kind of this follow up in some way, shape, or form, in however capacity you can bring it up.
Chief, before you go on, I'm also keeping my eye on the clock here, and I know that you have the rest of your presentation to get through. I want to suggest that we let the chief do that. And if we have any sort of burning questions once the chief has done that, maybe we get those taken care of, and then there's an opportunity maybe to follow up with you for more information, if that makes sense to you. Mr. Manager, is that okay with you? All right, so why don't we let Chief Atack get through his presentation, and if there are some things we need to address tonight, we can do that and then move on.
Thank you. Okay, so that was this this data. This is specific to the equipment and regulatory violations, and lists the percentage. There were, I think, 53. I think if I'm doing the math properly, 53 is the total number of equipment and regulatory classifications for the quarter. And again, that data is going to be tricky to look at, but we can see. I can take a look at it and see if it's one of those things we can do or not. But yes, that should be capturable in written, or if there's a citation issued or something along those lines. So, so there's the breakdown. This next slide shows enforcement action. So, enforcement action, basically, their officer can make an arrest, officer can issue a citation or a ticket, and then the officer can issue a warning. This can be a verbal warning or a written warning. So here's the breakdown. Generally, what we see is roughly at least 50% of our traffic stops get a warning. They'll elicit some sort of a warning. Roughly, you'll see, and it'll vary some. There was a question, I want to say it was almost a year ago, and I think it was Councilmember Romaine asked about the breakdown on the citation from the racial standpoint. And so what I talked about at that point, there's infractions in North Carolina, which are non-criminal violations, and then there are 4 levels of misdemeanor, which can also be traffic violations in North Carolina. So what you would expect to see is for the minor violations, more warnings. As you get into the more serious violations, like you're not going to get a warning for DWI, right? You would expect all your DWI investigations that lead to probable cause would lead with an arrest. Whereas expect to see minor speeding might get a warning, major speeding would probably get a warning, and at some point, if it escalates enough, could result in a careless and reckless charge or actually a physical custodial arrest. So that number was, we looked at that, I think it was about a year ago, and it did skew along the more severe charges, led to, it worked out. The more severe charges were getting the arrest and the charges and the citations, and the less severe charges were getting the warnings. But these are the numbers for quarter 3. About types of searches, again, this comes off of the SBI traffic stop form. These are the categories. So we have drivers and passengers. So we have, these are just the searches, very small numbers. We usually do in Carrboro have very small numbers. But the reason, erratic and suspicious behavior, observation of contraband, other official information, which could be from the computer, could be from other officers' knowledge, probable cause, which is the legal standard for arrest as well as for warrantless search of an automobile. We have suspicious movement, and then witness observation. So, and this is how the officers are just categorizing it as they go through. Search productivity. So you'll see here again, we have a no contraband option, and then we have alcohol, drugs, money, and then other. So we've got some in each of them this time. Looks like roughly a third, if I'm doing the math in my head properly, is no contraband found. So that's probably consistent because the standard to search legally into North Carolina is probable cause. You can also go on consent, but we, for the most part, don't do consent searches. We adopted that written consent search 2014. It's been a while. That was one of the recommendations, and it works out better. But we've basically gone away from consent searches. We do, if we do it, we do document it like consistent with our policy. But most of these are going to be based upon probable cause, which could be either how the officer observed something. We also use canines, the sniff, and that can be an option too, or other information. These are the probable cause searches. So once the officer establishes probable cause, again, there could be a number of factors that lead that. It could be the officer's observation. It could be free air sniff from the dog, other information. The person could tell them something, etc. Once they get to probable cause, what you're seeing here is the driver and passenger searches. So arrest, citations, and warnings. So sometimes you do conduct a search if you do have probable cause, but you may not find anything. Well, if you don't find anything, you had probable cause, but you don't have a charge. And that's where you may, get a warning. You may get if there's a traffic violation that precipitated that, And based on what you find, you could get an arrest out of that as well. Use of force incidents, there were 6 use of force incidents, and then the suspects involved, there were 5 black males and 1 Hispanic male. And then we had our citizen complaints. There's 1, which the other disposition. Other is a catch-all category. If we have, let's say there's an alleged 3 complaints against an officer, we find 2 of them are demonstrably false. 1 is, yeah, we agree with that. That would be an other, because we don't have an all or, we have an all or nothing designation, and that can be problematic when you have 2 or a no, but yes, we agree with the third, and that's where that other comes from. And that's the end of my, that's the abstract item, so I'm glad we were able to find that, so thank you to all the people that worked to find that. I apologize for the issue.
Chief, thank you for taking us through that. And so if folks have some additional questions, let's do that now. And
ask the question, and then he can just like email the response or whatever.
That'd be great. Thanks, Barbara.
And so I had a question about how your recruitment efforts are going as far as diversifying the department. And also just thinking about what happened in Memphis and, you know, not necessarily impacts in your department, but like, what do you do when something like that happens department-wise and with your officers as it relates to like training or, you know, whatever you do? I'm not sure what that is. And you're welcome to email that information like to the council.
I can give you a quick answer now, or would you just, for the interest of time, move on?
It's up to you. It's up to you.
I can tell you this, the actions of the officers in Memphis were disgusting to us as officers and as human beings. I put out an email the Friday that body-worn camera was supposed to, the footage was going to be released. And I told folks, I said, you're going to interact with people that are upset. And they should be upset. We should be upset. This is an absolute failure of humanity. This is a failure of an organization, right? We're talking basic core tenets of humanity. And it's disgusting. And we should all be offended. And it is the conversations that we have had around this, around George Floyd, around any time there's an issue somewhere else. Because number one, we need to legitimize, the way we conduct ourselves. We are not like that. We do not treat people in that manner. That is disgusting. I teach in the academy. I teach new recruits. You are ultimately responsible for people's well-being when you're doing your job. Period. Full stop. So yeah, that kind of activity is at a core human level disturbing. From a professional level, it is undermining all the good work that people do, all the good relationships, all the problem solving that we do as part of a community. And it is offensive and deeply troubling. And so, yes, visceral reaction. I'm more controlled than others, but when I tell you I feel that at my core as an abuse of humanity, and it is there and it is impactful. And so,
basically, you're talking about having a conversation, you know, with officers, and they get
Yes.
a chance to say whatever.
Yes.
You know, that they want to say.
yes.
Okay.
We have some very frank discussions about the way others conduct themselves, and the way we are expected to conduct ourselves and how we're different than that.
Thank you.
We are going to move on. But I've got a couple more questions from people who haven't had a chance to ask them. I'll summarize what I think I've heard from some of the questions that have come up so that maybe we can get some additional information from you and the manager. I will go with Danny and then Susan.
Yeah, thanks so much. And Chief, I really appreciate this. I wanted to make a note that I would really appreciate the trend reporting over time for pretty much everything in here. I think probably for like search productivity, like beginning on slide 9 and later, it's not, or 8 and later, it's probably not necessary. But for most of these bar graphs, slides 2 through 7, I think it would be really helpful to have some sense of time trends. And I also would appreciate, and I don't think there needs to be like a direct mandate, we can absolutely evolve in this direction, but I think a little extra granularity, cross-cutting some of these would be really helpful. And kind of what Eleazar is talking about, you know, how citations and warnings and arrests, some consideration of those against directly the reason for the stop would be really helpful. And I think, you know, to that end, insofar as it's possible, I think we would love to see what you see when you're making those calls as much as we possibly can. So thank you very much for this added context and for your willingness to continue to improve this with us.
Annie? Susan?
I'm looking at the clock. I'll be really quick. Thank you for your service. Thank you to your officers for their service. You had mentioned the footage earlier tonight, and I'm going to save this conversation. If you're at the next Coffee for a Cop, we can talk. But I'm just curious how you use footage, how you use that for, I assume you use it for training purposes, for identifying things that may...
Are you talking internal footage, or are you talking specifically about the Memphis incident?
Internal footage.
Yeah.
But we can have that conversation. I'm just really curious how you
I'll
use
say one
that.
sentence.
Yes.
It's an amazing tool
Mm-hmm.
to see yourself doing something and then start to say, hey, I could have done something better. It's a great developmental tool. And it also documents when we do right, and it documents if officers do not do right. And so, you know, there's been this full circle evolution in law enforcement. We hate them, we love them, we hate them again, now we love them again. But the reality is, and I tell the officers, it's a tool to document that, A, to hold you accountable, and B, to hold the community accountable, so that we are treating people properly and we're all behaving in a manner that we would expect from our officers. And it's a more objective recording of the reality. So I think it's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Susan. Thank you, Chief. So you've heard some interest in more data about trends over time for many of these data
I'll
points,
rely
which I
on
think
you.
would be helpful.
I rely on Wesley, who's very helpful in a lot of manners. So thank you.
And I'm happy to summarize these for Wesley later on too. I think LESR and maybe others examples of what those other stops, so-called other stops
Yeah,
are.
I'll have to dig into that, and I apologize. Normally, I'm good on my feet, but I cannot, for the life of me,
have
hypothetically
to
come up
be
with
on your
another off the top of my head right now. So that's you've stumped me.
And again, coming back to this interest in trends, I have a number of notes about people being interested in time trends. So I'll just say that one more time, time trends. And Barbara asked about just how your recruitment efforts are going, so it'd be interesting to know about that. And then finally, kind of how these national incidents are affecting the conversations and training you're doing with your officers in the department, as well as Susan's question about how video footage is used as a training tool and so on.
Yep.
There was also one slide on the searches, and it has suspicious behavior in one category, and then suspicious movement. And so, as you're fine-tuning everything, if that could be a little clearer in terms of what the difference between those two things is.
Yeah, so this is all from the SBI's form. So we basically were told whenever we started, I think 2001, 2002, this is the form you use. So what I can do is I can kind of talk about what each of those mean to us. But we have sought an objective, rational definition from somewhere, and they don't exist. So we would have to create an internal one. So yes, but I can cover that.
Damon, just two more on that summary. A comparison demographic of drivers pie chart for comparing to the other pie charts.
Oh, that's right. Thank you. I did write that down, Sammy. Sorry, I
And
missed
then
that.
also,
Just displaying that pie chart of the weighted racial
Yes.
demographic
Yeah, and
information
then
along with the
On
other.
the same, yeah.
pre and post policy
Okay.
slide showing how we've. Thank you.
That's right. So that's the pre-post for equipment regulatory stops. What's changed since that policy was adopted? Cool.
Okay.
Thank you, Sammy, for the reminder on that. Okay. So I'd like to entertain a motion to approve this item, which is to accept the report, or do we have another question? Go ahead, Elisa.
No, I'll just email you, but I'll go ahead and move the item.
Seconded, moved by LESR, seconded by Danny, that we approve this item. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Matter passes unanimously. Chief, thank you for taking us through that.
Thank you. Sorry for the snafu.
We'll have some
I'll
more
try-
questions coming your way.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate it.
I think that's all of the items from the consent agenda, Mr. Manager. Is that right?
Yes.
We'll move on to other matters.
The next item is a request to authorize the town manager to sign the Carmel office space lease. The purpose of the agenda item is to authorize the town manager to sign a 3-year office lease agreement with Carmel Mall Limited Partnership. And I'll answer any questions council may have.
So you're available for questions and no presentation, is that right? Okay. Do council members have any questions for the manager on this item? If there are not, Elizar. I think you had also shared some responses to council member questions earlier by email.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
Elizar, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Manager, I'm getting a chance to read your responses. Thank you for that. I just wanted to couple of things, and maybe you don't have the answer to this at the moment, and this is completely fine. When I was speaking about what is the percentage of the additional cost of the budget, or just I was asking about as you mentioned, as you pointed out, a lot of this is front end cost, to set the space up. If we were to go for community works instead of Carmel, that's what I was asking about. And if you don't have the answer to it, that's completely fine, because but I wanted to see what percentage difference would that be, right? What's how much would that be of our budget this year? Does that make sense?
You mean the total town budget, or?
Yeah. Like out of, or our operational budget, whatever this would be pulled out of, I want to know what percentage of additional cost that would be, just for my own thoughts. And just to say thank you also for responding to the questions. I know a lot of these are I'm sure questions that you've had before, and I'm thankful that you took the time to put them into an email. I do apologize that I'm now just able to read them, but I will say, not so much as a question for you, Mr. Manager, but just in general, I'm struggling with voting for this contract. I understand the additional cost, and this is more to like council members and community as a whole, but I understand the additional kind of being the safeguarders of the public purse of Carrboro, making sure that we're doing the best fiscal decisions for our town. But I do believe that putting money into a community organization brings those funds back into town. We're talking about a nonprofit that works every day to support Black and brown folks and just folks with low income in our communities, whether that's employing them, whether that's providing them with different services, and being able to go to a place where they can get really nice things at a very affordable price. I know that I myself, just a little bit over a year ago, relied on Community Works to be able to furnish my home. So I want to say to council members, I encourage us to invest in our community, invest in nonprofits, and I see that investment. And I understand the difficulties with staff in this, and having to furnish the two different spots, having to not being able to be in one solid space, and I honor and accept that. But I also am thinking this is a 3-year contract. It's not a permanent. It's not it's a stopgap measure between now and getting that our full office is open. So with that, I will just say that just let folks know that I'm not going to be voting for this. I would rather us invest in community and nonprofits. And again, Mr. Manager, thank you for all the work that you've already done on this. And I respect that. And this is my vote is not a reflection of your work. It's just a reflection of where I think our values as a council should be.
Thank you, Eleazar. Barbara.
So ditto what Councilmember Posada said, and I said this when it came up the first time. I think there's a lot of value in our community partners, and if we continue to operate business as usual, where money comes in and other things that I really think we could be worked through, we will never realize the transformative change that some of us talk about. And so I won't be voting for it either, because I think we would be better served to pour our money into a nonprofit that is run by a woman of color. The least dollars would flow back into the community in multiple ways through a nonprofit. And so also who we do business with is truly a reflection of our own value system. And so it's a missed opportunity, based on, what staff is saying in the agenda item. and the town manager. And it's no reflection. For me, it's about principle and what I've always talked about how important it is for us to engage with BIPOC-run businesses and BIPOC-owned businesses. So I won't be voting for it either. Thanks.
All right, appreciate those comments about the proposal. Are there any other questions or comments for the manager on this item before we entertain a motion? Sammy?
Yeah, I'd just like to share my perspective on this and appreciate my colleagues who've expressed themselves so far. For me, it boils down to, what is staff's needs? We're trying to address space here, and staff very clearly identifies one of these as preferable over the other, in that it allows for more synergy for staff to work together. And actually looking at the plan for community works, I can understand the two spaces being opposite of one another on opposite sides of the building, and then the travel between. I understand where staff is coming from. We're wanting to go with Carmel instead. So that's kind of the first thing that I think we're considering. I totally understand though that, we should always be looking out for those other opportunities. But for me, it's like, are we meeting the first need? If what we're talking about is supporting, these community organizations and nonprofits, then perhaps we could instead allocate $75,000 extra to our, our support for nonprofit organizations, and we can achieve the same purpose. But I think that compromising our staff's ability to do the work for the town as a whole is not the best way to do that. So I'm all for supporting community organizations and historically what's the HUB stand for? Historically underutilized businesses. But I think that we have to weigh that with what the needs are that staff has identified and why they're recommending that we go with Carmel.
Sammy? Okay. Susan, do you have a motion?
I'll make a quick comment and then I'll have a motion. Yeah, I appreciate that. I too really appreciate the work of Community Home Trust in the community, and they have Community Works, excuse me. And, just this whole idea of sort of recycling items that then can be provided to community members at very affordable prices. I heard one speaker say on the previous meeting, I think it was December 6th, she said something about it's the only place in town where you can get a basketball pump, and I think that's probably true. That said, when I'm looking at this whole question about DEI, trying to weigh that with the cost, and the $75,000, I think it comes to about a 50% write-up over the Community Works contract lease is about 50% higher than Carmel. As Sammy said, I think that $75,000 could be still doing really good work for our nonprofits, perhaps distributed through outside agency grants or what have you. But I will be supporting the lease for Carmel Mall this evening.
Can I ask
Is that a?
Sorry, Mayor.
Go ahead, Barbara.
I know there were pocket questions, I'm sorry. I know there were pocket questions here, and I was just kind of wondering how folks in general felt about those pocket questions. This was a great exercise for the pocket questions, and I guess everybody's had kind of a chance to look at them and kind of glean whether they have value. I personally think they have a lot of value. They add a lot of context, to issues. So was just wondering what everybody thought about that.
Thanks for raising that, Barbara. I thought it was a really helpful, as you said, an exercise to go through on this item in particular. And I'm looking forward. I think the manager had mentioned that this is a tool that the staff is kind of just now learning how to use. They got this from the resources that are available to them as part of the coalition. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about how the staff starts to use it and how we start to use it more consistently in our decision making. But I agree, Barbara, it was a good way to read through these questions with respect to this agenda item, and be thinking about how to ask those same questions for other decisions we have to make coming up. So yeah, absolutely.
Manager White, were those pocket questions used in making the recommendation for the Carmel Mall lease from staff?
Yes, we also look at that with the cemetery plot sale as well, and that's what we'll try to do in the future with the items coming to council, use those pocket questions. And I guess there are times I'll refer to Anita, when we actually do the entire racial equity lens, which is a much longer analysis as well.
Sort of bigger policy level
Yes,
questions.
yes.
Yes, Randy, go ahead.
That's a motion. Was it a motion?
Yes, that's a motion.
I'll second that motion, and I just want to add that I indeed thought about the, I wouldn't call them pocket questions, but the DEI questions. And, I had to keep putting in front of my thinking two points. One is that if it weren't for the cost, this would not have even come before us. This is the kind of administrative decision that is usually made at the management level of the town government, and it's only because of the increase in cost that it comes to us. So that tells me that this is something that the way management, the recommendation that's made by management is the one that management sees as fitting the need of staff first and foremost. Second is that in our role, we need to be sure that we have a high-performing, effective government. And during a 3-year period, I just could not see staff working in an environment that where they're separated or that is not as conducive to the kind of work they need to do, and also work where they're sharing space with other entities. And I think for that reason, I'm most comfortable with the recommendation that the staff has made.
Thanks, Randy. There's a motion. Eleazar, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Manager, as I'm reading through your responses to my questions, I wanted just to follow up on one of them. I asked you, how would you describe the impact of these 3 years on the work? Or let me rephrase that. How would you describe the impact of the work needed to be done by being on opposite sides of the building? And I just want to follow up on that. With having, and I see the equipment, and I see the having to either share, having to put in, basically you have to furnish it better, right? You have to put more furnishment in there. But like, how much would this impact based on who's going to be housed in those satellite offices? What impact on the work? And going back to, because I agree with Councilmember Haven O'Donnell, we do need to have a high functioning government. So I'm curious, how would you describe that impact if the staff would be in Carmel and having to walk across the floor?
Well, again, the idea is to have staff in one place where they could work collaboratively closer to each other than having to go back and forth across the whole entire floor of a building. I'm following what you're asking me, but
maybe I'm not phrasing right. I'm wondering how much of an impact it would have, right? So would it be, and maybe we just don't have the answer to this, but would it be like a decrease of 50% of productivity? Would it cause damage? I mean, and again, maybe we just won't know the answers to these questions, and I'll just leave it at that. But I'm just going back to, I want to make sure that staff have what they need, and this is a temporary position, and I want to make sure that folks are able to do their work. But I'm also looking at the values that this council has said time and time again that we stand by. And I and maybe it's just I'm not understanding it. Maybe I just don't know enough. But I fail to see how having to go from one side of the building to the other would be a magnificent imposition on the quality of work or the amount of work that it gets done. But I'll pause there and again, I just pause there.
So there is a motion on the table and it's been seconded. And I appreciate you raising those questions, both of you, Barbara and Eleazar, about the DEI so-called pocket questions that we received. It was really helpful to read through those and be considering those questions. You know, I will say, in addition to some of the points that others made, one of the things that kept coming up for me is just there is a significant difference in the cost. It's not a, you know, it's not a modest, it's not a minor difference, not even a modest difference. It's a significant difference in the cost, right? So that to me kind of keeps coming to the front of my mind as I look at this, even as I think about how great it would be to be able to use the space at Community Works. And so that's really one of the things that's driving my position on this. So Susan made the motion to approve
I'm sorry, before we move on.
Yes,
Mayor, I'm
Barbara.
sorry. And so this is also a good exercise, Mr. White, knowing the values of this council and of this town, and not leaning so much one way, because there's a very stark line being drawn here as it relates to council and town value and money. I agree with Councilmember Posada about the space. I think the space is not what makes our staff high functioning. You know, the staff could be high functioning pretty much anywhere. Yeah, it's good if they have, you know, nice space to work in, but if they're high functioning folks anyway. So I'm not sold on, you know, this thing about having to walk, you know, across, but I really would like to see the values, you know, come in, because the pocket questions add great context. And so, I mean, it's just the way the line is being drawn here. It makes me very uncomfortable, but I would appreciate it if you would work to just kind of, because we can chew gum and walk at the same time. I see that happening. And so I see a lot of value in Community Works. And other than pouring our money into what I consider like a dark hole. So, and I'm still voting no, by the way.
Okay. So the motion and second have been made. There are no further questions. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, please say no.
No.
So the vote is 5 yes and 2 no. All right. Move on to the next item, please, Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. The next item is cemetery plot sales, fee structure, and improvements. The purpose of agenda item is to provide the town council with information requested at the October 11, 2022 council work session regarding prioritizing cemetery plot sales, a sliding scale fee structure for conventional cemetery plots, and funding for improvements at Old Carrboro Cemetery and Westwood Cemetery. And Ben Schmadig, our Capital Projects Manager, will do a presentation.
After the presentation. Yeah, I have you on the list, Bob.
Chief Tech had me worried. So good evening, Mayor and council members. This is a follow-up from the October council work session on Carrboro cemeteries. So we will be going over 3 topics: options to restrict plot sales and slow the purchase rate, a sliding scale fee structure for consideration, and cemetery improvements. So just a quick recap: Old Carrboro Cemetery sold out of plots in January of last year, and Westwood Cemetery, we're down to the last 102 plots of zones 1 through 3, which have been mapped out, and zone 4 has not been mapped out or developed. And so these are the options that were passed on by council members and some by staff. So option A, revise the town code to limit sales of cemetery plots to at need only. And at need is considered a plot sale for a deceased individual in need of immediate burial. So we took a quick look at the sales over the last 4 years, and it accounts for about half of plot sales. B, this was provided by staff, revise the town code to limit the number of cemetery plots sold per person. There's been a few instances where one individual has purchased more than 10 plots over the past few years, so I want to put that out there. Revise the town code to limit the cemetery plots to Carrboro residents only. And so we looked at the last 20 years, and 86% of the plot sales have been to Carrboro residents in the last 20 years. Revise the town code to limit cemetery plot sales to individuals located within a specified radius of Westwood Cemetery. The image shown is 5 miles, as an example. And revise the town code to limit the cemetery plot sales to those with family members already interred at Westwood Cemetery. And this is one that staff is not recommending. It would be difficult to confirm and enforce. A number of these would require documentation by the, or staff would be requesting documentation from the individuals buying the plots. And again, these are all of the options presenting tonight. I'll come back to this. So at council's request, we developed a sliding scale fee structure. And so this is using the Carrboro Affordable Housing sliding scale for Orange County. And so we have the percentages of area median income by household size and applied to the cemetery fees is the scale on the bottom there. And so there are a few cemetery improvements we're also looking for approval and consideration. The fence at Old Carrboro Cemetery, which has fallen down and in need of replacement. The 40 Bradford pear trees at Westwood Cemetery that we'd like to replace with native species. And some drainage improvements at Westwood Cemetery, and including a rain garden. Public Works has done some minor grading as kind of a intermediary improvement, and we also procured a soil scientist to analyze the lower right area, and they did confirm it was suitable for burial plots. And then just benches, improved lighting, and some additional hardscape at Westwood Cemetery. And so our recommendation is for you all to discuss the options and provide direction. Any of those options could be, any or all of them could be adopted, and also consider the sliding scale financial aid so we can bring back a town code amendment. And then consider approving the cemetery improvements to be completed now or included in the next year's budget, depending on the priority and funding availability. So that's it.
Thanks, Ben. Wondering, folks, if we might start first by going to public comment and then ask any questions that council members have. If that's okay. I only have one person signed up, and that's Mr. Proctor, Bob Proctor. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you.
And as you know, we ask folks to keep their comments to about 3 minutes. Okay. So I'll have my handy timer going.
Okay, well, our community should be educated and engaged concerning the possible expansion of the graveyard. Buying one beautiful rural acre only 5 minutes out on Jones Ferry Road is an alternative that should be known. Neighbors and I worked hard to get folks to speak at a November 2021 comprehensive plan hearing. The most tangible thing we got was a motion passed 7-0 requesting staff to research the availability and summarized it. 2 more of you voted in favor of it. We need this information for a website, and we need it well in advance of your next work session, during which the path forward could get baked in. The numbers of plots sold per year has been erratic. The remaining plots could last as little as 12 months. If a community education and input process is done, and then it is decided to expand into Zone 4, there will still be time needed to decide how to lay things out and to do some construction. Can all of that be completed within 18 months? Meanwhile, we should conserve the remaining spaces for Carrboro families with immediate needs. Votes opposing tightening the sales rules will be votes in favor of risking one or both of 2 possibilities. Unavailability of even immediate use plots for some period of time, or pushing ahead and rushing this expansion without full community education and without the community consultation promised by the comprehensive plan. So I hope you will at least suspend sales of future use plots. Some of those plots wouldn't get used for decades. Why make contracts going 20 years forward when we don't know what we'll be doing in 2 years? It would be even better to essentially restrict the immediate use sales to residents, but with family exceptions listed in the proposal that Councilor Romaine set out on Saturday. The exception allowing non-resident family members to be immediately buried here could be implemented with an honor system. The application form could describe the direct relative requirement and ask the purchaser to check one box and write in a name. Most non-family requests will be deterred since those potential buyers won't know staff won't actually check out the claims. As for checking residency, staff is already doing this for the fee. Please don't sell our precious land to bury unrelated non-residents who have no relatives buried here.
Thanks very much, Bob. Okay, I don't have any other folks signed up to speak tonight. Are there others who wish to speak? Braxton, come on up. Welcome, Braxton.
Welcome, everybody. There's an old saying that my grandmother used to say all the time: if it's not broke, don't fix it. And I don't think the cemetery is broken. There was a state law, if you might know or don't know, that black folk could not be buried in a cemetery with whites. State law. The first black person to be buried at Westwood was a citizen of Carrboro and an owner. His name was Robert Nix. I think it was 68 or 69. He's the first black man to be buried out there. I would hate to see us grab the first noise that came up about a funeral, about a graveyard, to have this much power over a board. That person could dictate, or that group could dictate what happens with the dead. And the dead, among black folk, are very strange. In the preceding years, we only had a couple of places to bury black folk. Carrboro provided one, Chapel Hill provided the other. The reason that the Westwood Cemetery has been expanded is because when I sit in your chairs, the lower portion of that land was about to expire for plots. So we opened the upper plot. The reason the land is still there is because the foresight of a lot of people who sat in those chairs to provide that space for burial. I think it should stay just like it is. We don't need anybody trying to decide who should be going in there, whether they're a resident of this town, because Chapel Hill and Carrboro provided both cemeteries for both staffs. And you're going to have family members buying plots who stay in Chapel Hill and Carrboro because their relatives are buried out there. We still have enough space to put benches, to provide for family members to come and sit and honor their relatives. And I
20
don't,
seconds, Braxton.
I don't think my grandmother was wrong when she said, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Braxton. It's good to see you here.
I'm always going to be around.
We know. Okay. Don't have any other hands for folks who need to speak. Okay. All right. Questions for Ben about the presentation or other comments? Barbara, go ahead.
Ben, thank you for the presentation. I do want to go back. I know Councilmember Haven O'Donnell provided some information. And I see here where it says provided by council members and others. And I just, I really just want to say that I provided zero information here. And so when you put council members, it makes it seem like potentially a collective when maybe only a couple actually worked with Mr. Proctor on this agenda item. So I'm saying I did not work, on this agenda item. And I think, in the interest of transparency, I know when I have asked in the past for information or something related to an agenda item, my name pops right up. Councilmember Barbara Foushee asked for, and I look at it and I'm like, well, it's information for everybody. My name just pops right up. So I think, this obscurity here is very uncomfortable for me, because I want to know who provided the information. Aren't we living in transparency? Hello?
Yeah, understood.
Oh, not you. Not you.
Well,
not you. I'm saying
good
whoever.
point.
Whoever. I know Randy, she worked on it, and I appreciate her, coming forth with the email, and the information and stuff. But if my name can be outed, so can everybody else's. And I'm not sure who that is, but I'm just saying, I think that, is very fair.
Thank you, Barbara.
I have more, but I'll go ahead and let Eleazar go ahead. I just wanted to raise that point. And don't everybody talk at once.
Okay, so we've got Eleazar next.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I just had a couple of questions. And Mr. Manager, thank you for sending me the information that I asked for around the history of the Westwood Cemetery, as well as some information that highlights for me why I do not want to see us limit sale of these plots at all. I think we need to, as a council, if there is still questions about whether or not to move into the other side of the cemetery, let's have that discussion and have that decision. Because a couple of things, and I'll explain where I'm coming from. As needed, there's a couple of things there. In my community, it is customary, and well, at least from where I'm from, in the Rio Grande Valley, it's customary that families are placed to rest as close to each other as possible. When my grandfather died, my grandmother was able to get a plot and buy hers right next to her husband. My aunt proceeded to buy a plot next to her family, to her parents. My uncle was not able to get one next to them, but was able to get one row down. My aunt used her plot 6 months later. My uncle hasn't used his, and my grandmother hasn't used hers, and this was 5 years ago. If we're limiting it as need basis, it's very likely that if this situation was here in Carrboro, my grandmother would not be able to lay next to her husband, and my aunt would not be laying next to her father. So I'm not okay with that. I just think this is short-sighted and not is not bringing in the cultural realities around burials. Looking at limiting plots once again. If I decide, I want to be laid to rest in Carrboro, whenever that happens, one, I can't buy it because it would be as need. I hope I'm not going to need it anytime soon, knock on wood on that one. But say I want to buy one for my future husband. I want to buy one for my mother, who wants desperately to be laid next to her 3 kids. So say we decide there, I wouldn't be able to buy one for my mother and my 2 brothers. 1, because they don't live in Carrboro. 2, I would be limited to how many I can buy. And 3, they wouldn't be needed at the moment. And then I come back to, and I know that staff is not recommending the family ties in order to be buried in this cemetery, and I respect that, and I'm glad staff is not recommending it. But I would add to the reasons to not recommend that is because of the fact that it was a whites-only cemetery. We're limiting to only families. We're limiting to the majority of folks who will be able to be buried there are folks who are beneficiaries, once again, of nothing less than racism. As for the other parts, I'm fully in favor of creating a sliding scale. I think that's great. I think we need to address costs and making it so that our communities are able to be buried where they need to be buried, regardless of what they can afford. And I'm completely in favor of moving forward with the improvements on both cemeteries. But I think if there is an urgency to decide what happens to that other side of the cemetery, let's treat it as the urgency it is. Let's bring it to whatever process needs to happen, and I would love to include community in what that looks like. But prioritizing rather than dealing with the issue is nothing more than a Band-Aid.
Go to Danny, Andy, Susan.
Couple questions for Ben, which I suspect are quick. So we do not at present have a firm understanding of how Zone 4 would affect the overall stock of burial plots, right? We don't have that analysis.
Well, there was a concept plan that did, I mean, they looked at how many could fit there, and they looked at some other things, some other internment options, and that's a concept plan that was provided to the council previously.
And I recall that, and I appreciate you reminding me of that. I guess my understanding was last time we left, it was, I guess, the bedrock concerns. We weren't positive exactly how realistic. We don't have like a more concrete understanding than that plan at present, right?
Well, the report associated with that plan, they did has a geotechnical data associated with it, so they analyzed all of that. And the concept plan, if did have in the where the bedrock is high, they had the other features, the columbarium walls and memorial garden.
So the columbarium in that concept plan, where there is not the columbarium is suitable for burial in that path.
Correct.
Thank you. That is exactly what I'm after. So with that in mind, really helpful. I have kind of a lot of thoughts here, if y'all will indulge me. So I think the pause proposal in a lot of ways is pretty reasonable. I think it's pretty likely that as written, very few people are excluded. The thing about it for me that is leading me to not really feel like it's necessary for us, and it really is not a strong feeling here for me, it's an issue of necessity. Do we need it? Is I think that the pause is really only necessary if we are committed to moving away from using Zone 4 as a cemetery. If we want to preserve as a park that is not in any way a cemetery, if we want a green space that is green space in isolation. That's where the urgency comes from here. And so for me, given especially that that's a little bit more concrete than I realized from my recollection of the report, and we have heard from residents, and I've moved on this issue. You know, I initially, when we first heard about it, I think I've talked to most of you about this over the time we've been considering it. You know, we've heard from residents who want the park, and I think that as they've rightly identified, the comprehensive plan, you know, has identified that the part of town that this plot of land is in is poorly served by public green space. It's a high concentration of renters. There's a heat island effect there that is very real and that is sort of a blight on some residents that we want to do a better job by protecting. On the other hand, we've heard from people with really strong, really both rational and emotional reasons to want to preserve a very limited option in a couple counties. We don't have a lot of public burial options. I'm not predisposed to thinking it's the smoothest possible option for the town of Carrboro to be a burial provider, but here we are. A lot of families use it, and I think that the current demand is a reflection of the fact that this is actually a pretty valuable service that we provide. If we're on pace to run out within 18 months, people are using this in the way that it is. So all that said, I pretty strongly feel we need to be working toward a compromise that identifies the heat island effect and that incorporates as much of the sort of like passive recreation plan that the consultants identified as we can stomach at a reasonable price point. I think, like we all love the consultant plan as like a super deluxe cemetery, but I think we all understand that the resources associated with that plan are not feasible. It strikes me as very plausible that we can fix the invasive species, significantly ameliorate the heat island effects, promote passive recreation in respectful ways, create a space that people can use. I'm from downtown Raleigh. Oakwood Cemetery is sort of like a cornerstone of that part of town. People read, jog, walk, bands play, it's programmed. It doesn't, and this is not that same thing, but all to say, it's not unheard of that, cemeteries provide this space. And so, given that I think that really should be the North Star, is like we've heard a lot of push-pull on this issue, and that we have this space at present, I think that the pause is not necessary and creates kind of a lot of burden on staff to administer something that ultimately we should be able to resolve within 18 months in directing staff to a plan towards cemetery expansion. One thing that really does give me pause here is the direction. We have the 7-0 resolution to report on possible land acquisition. It is a drag to me that we are not firmer as a board and in staff in reporting on that. I think that is a failure on our parts. It's the kind of thing we've been talking about as a board and improving. following up on priorities, and making sure that we improve transparency with the public. To that end, with the understanding that this is very back of the envelope, I'm looking at Zillow, and I'm looking at lots and land in Orange County, south of Hillsborough. We're talking about $100,000 an acre. This is not a chump change purchase. It would be, come against the improvements that are needed in facilities as they exist now. And it would come with further, like all of the engineering and landscaping, there would be more costs associated on top of that than just acquiring the cemetery. And then there are costs associated with the possible future park. All to say, I think as we move toward trying to be a little bit more action-oriented and a little bit more transparent, and considering how many other issues we face and how much we're asking of our staff right now, I would really like it if we could make quick work of this, not accept the pause, and direct staff to come back to us within the time frame identified for a compromise option that provides green space while preserving as much burial of Zone 4 as can be done. So I apologize for being so long-winded. Thank you for hearing me.
Is that a work session you're talking about to bring all this information back, or are you talking about just another agenda item where we're addressing the information we don't have as far as, so I'm.
Seems like a possible work session.
Yeah, I think
Okay,
probably a work
okay.
session.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so next up is Randy, then Susan, then Sammy.
Yeah, well, thank you, Danny, for sharing that. So Eleazar, I have a question, because you raised a great point about families. I come from a family that has, it's huge family plots, so I get that. My question is, essentially, at some point, there's 102 plots that are left under the current plan. That could be gone by, a year from now in February. So, and I'm trying to understand, does that mean that you would be supportive of the town looking at other land in addition to whatever could be, completed at Westwood? And I say that because at some point, family keeps expanding and they still want to be with family. Where are they going to go? And Susan and I were in a side conversation that maybe makes sense to raise, especially if we do a work session, Ben, on is this something that, the other municipalities in the county would partner with us to look at? And I say that because more and more, and this is separate from the pause question, because I think the pause question is a short-term answer. And that's why I find myself supporting it, because it's a short-term answer to a much larger problem that we want to be able to delve deeper into, which is, at what point is there enough land so that expanded family has options over time. But I think that's a separate question from the 102 plots and how best they are addressed. But I would say that if there's the option of us having a larger conversation with the other municipalities in the county as to how do we want to answer this? Because one of the things that I've noticed that's true, and I've been here now 45 years, is that I'm seeing that the people that I moved in here with stayed. Their children stayed. Even if they went off to school, they've come back. And parents who were from someplace else have come. So it's a very different vertical community than it was 45 years ago. And there may be greater interest, and this is where the public engagement is important, because there may be greater interest in having other space when the 102 plots are gone. So I think what we need to do is we need to look short-term and have a good game plan for those 102, because they're gonna go like that.
Can't predict death, so you don't know when it's going to
Well,
go.
you know, numerically, you can figure that even half of them may be gone by December of 2023. You know, but it's still, you have to have a tight game plan for those. And I'm not saying we have to decide that tonight, but I think it makes sense to make a decision, you know, about the 102, and then look at a work session that's going to delve in a linear way what comes next decision-wise. And I think public engagement should also be included in that. And I absolutely understand the question of expansion and families who are here, who, you know, even if the family arrived here, you know, 2 days ago, if they intend to stay, they may want to be able to have something in the future. So, so I'm comfortable with pausing, but I really appreciate Danny talking about working towards compromise, because I think that should be part of what we're looking at in a work session. So, thank you.
Councilmember, may I respond to the question, please? So thank you for that, and I think that's part of, based on your question, if I understood it correctly, it's, you know, would I then support finding additional land or acquiring different once this is over? Here's my thing. I don't know. I don't know whether the town should continue in the cemetery business or not. I need to hear from community on that. And part of my point is that we need to have that conversation sooner rather than later, because these plots are going to go out. We do have that land that is set aside, as I understand, for it to be additional plots. I mean, burial sites. And I don't see a change to the town code as something short-term or something we should even consider as a short-term option. Two, again, and here's where I'm drawing the distinction, right? This is currently operated and owned by the town. Once it runs out, it runs out. No one else can be, there's no way. I don't want to have the town be in any way, shape, or form in a place where they can restrict someone's ability to be with their family when there's still space available. If the spaces run out, that's not the town restricting someone's ability to be buried. That is the reality of the situation, that there's no more land. And obviously, you know, families will have to find an alternate option. But it's not us as a council, it's not us as a town telling telling anyone they can't bury their family. That's where my biggest concern lies. And I go back to this discussion. I want to have the discussion. I want to have community members let us know whether or not they want Carrboro to continue in the cemetery business. I think, you know, as I'm looking at this this conversation deeper, there is a there's a public service aspect to it. There's an affordability aspect to it. There's also how much do we want the town staff to have to deal with these issues? How much do we want to be involved in this rather than other services in town? How much do the community wants us to do? There's a lot of questions that I think we need to have the conversation about, and I don't see changing the town code as anything we should ever consider as a short-term option. And that's just my opinion. That's where I stand. And again, council member, thank you for the question.
Next is Susan, and then Sammy.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your presentation, Ben. And this has been a great conversation, so thank you all for your comments. Danny, I'd really like your idea of a work session and moving towards some kind of compromise on all of this. One idea I have in terms of the timing, though, is we're at, I think, 102 plots. And there's going to be a lag between when we make decisions and when we actually have new burial spaces. So that to me points me in the direction of wanting a pause, some kind of pause. I don't know what it will be. I think the pause would be more effective if it was, if really pause isn't the right word, if we prioritized the immediate use as opposed to future use. So I would be in favor of this with that pause built in, to sort of fill this gap between when we make a decision and when we actually have more space. The other question I wanted to raise is this evening, is this still part of a conversation around the $130,000 in improvements to Westwood, or is that a separate conversation?
Yeah, that's on the table for sure.
Okay, and is that coming later, or are we talking about that now?
Yeah, that's part of what's been presented. So.
Right, and I anticipate some of that would kind of get pushed into the budget discussions.
Okay. Two quick things on that then, in terms of improvements. One is we had one of the a community member speak about the erosion leading to the exposure of some of the caskets, and I just wanted to firm up that these improvements will include, under the stormwater, that will be addressing that problem with some of the caskets being exposed.
Yeah, we've addressed that already in a couple different ways. We've tried to divert some of the water from away from the hill there, and then also the soil expert provided a recommendation on how to excavate and then put the dirt back to minimize erosion. And so that's what we've been doing. The rain guard would be in addition to that.
Great. So that's good news. And the other question I had, this is a small detail, but it's kind of bugged me, is there's a sign there at Westwood Cemetery, and it basically steals language from, not steals, it has the language from our land use ordinance. And it's kind of regulatory language on all of the things not to do there at the cemetery. The sign is quite old, and so I wondered, as part of some of these cemetery improvements, I have no idea how much a new sign would cost, but just with some friendlier, more welcoming language, I was hoping we could include that with some of these improvements.
This is Sammy.
Thanks for the presentation. I appreciate everyone's comments so far. Everything for me is very thoughtful, and there's a lot of complexity involved. One of my concerns is that we've been at this conversation for a couple of years now, and the clock's been ticking, and the plots have been getting sold. So we're getting to a point where everyone's needs are not going to be addressed, and for that reason, I am for having a way of mitigating that all these concerns not being addressed very soon by cutting our losses and following through with restricting using A, B, C, and D. I feel like E is kind of too queasy for a lot of our members on the council. And I look forward to that work session. I think it's a good idea, and to be very clear that it'd be within the next 3 months for the council to hash out what the regular meeting will be regarding town expansion of a cemetery, park space, or new rural cemetery, and that we include information. Actually, I think we already requested this, of what the other jurisdictions think about sharing a cemetery space. That was brought up again by Randy tonight. But also following through with a resolution requesting, what are the costs of land in other areas that are outside of town. To Danny's point of $100,000 per acre, I think that's really cheap when what we're looking at is an opportunity cost of what's the cost of land for a park in town. We're talking about an acre being, what's the cost for an acre in town, So it's a lot more. So there has to be a cost-benefit analysis in terms of what the savings are there. I think an acre would buy us many decades of respecting all these cultural needs that have been expressed tonight, and continuing with that demand, if that will be what the community wants. The other thing is, in terms of these other three questions, in the sliding scale, I'm all for it. Can you show that slide again? The one thing I would add to or change in this is that why stop at 100%? So, in other words, if someone's area medium income is 115%, then it should be incrementing proportional to what we're decreasing the costs for. You know what I'm saying? So this is a great, exciting opportunity to actually practice progressive, fees and taxation. So I think we should be increasing the cost going the other way too. People pay as they can, and that would be a way to catch that. In regard to the fence at the old cemetery, I know Westwood doesn't have a fence. I know that UNC has a stone fence. I'm just wondering why we would want to replace the fence. What is dividing the cemetery from is woods. So I'm not really in favor of spending, what is it, $18,000 for that fence. So that's my 2 cents on that, or $18,000 on that. So with all that being said, I'd like to make a motion.
I haven't spoken yet, but you can go ahead and make your motion.
Yeah. So my motion is that we have a work session within the next 3 months for council to hash out what regular meeting will be regarding town expansion of cemetery, park space, or new rural cemetery, or a combination of those three, and that we include information as per the resolution seeking, what is the cost of land in other places in town, or whatever that resolution said, and discussing with Chapel Hill and Orange County whether there's some collaboration there that we may all pitch in on a joint cemetery somewhere. And that we, the second part of the motion is that we change the town code to do A, B, C, and D. As that's the prioritizing of sale of plots. That's in the agenda packet.
I tried to capture that as I could, but at the base of it is the work session with the information about the various options, including the combination options and compromise options, plus a proposal to move forward with A, B, C, and D on that restrictions list. Before we come to you next, Barbara, on the list, is there a second of Sammy's motion before we? Okay.
Can I move to divide the motion?
Before we get there, why don't we hear from Barbara on the.
Thank you. And thank you, colleagues, for all your input. It is really incredible to me that a cemetery is under attack. This is where the dead rest. Is a place of respect and reverence. And, we're talking about money. We just finished haggling about money with the office lease, where you guys were all over it. Oh, community works is too expensive. But here we are over here, and you're saying, oh, yeah, let's find some land, and buy another cemetery when we already got a cemetery owned Davie and Fidelity. We're double spending. The land was bought and purposed for a cemetery. That's its use. So why would we go out and spend more money for something that we already have? But with the office lease, community works is too expensive. So which side of the fence are you on? You can't predict death. Death comes like a thief in the night. You don't know when death is going to come to anybody. This is a crapshoot as far as the rate at which people are going to die. And why would we even want to be putting our finger on that? The race equity impact. I appreciate my husband, a former elected official who was doing this before any of us thought about it. I appreciate him coming to bring that history and that context and what it means to the Black community as most of us do a traditional in-ground burial. And for me, it's insensitive, it's disrespectful, and it's distasteful. I would like to recommend a reading. It was done by the Preservation Society of Chapel Hill. It's called A Segregated Part of Heaven. And this is relevant to this conversation. How do we even propose to limit anything to our taxpayers? How does that even work? Changes to the town code. Don't they have to go to an advisory board? Or are we just doing this, right? I would recommend it go to advisory board, particularly Race Equity Commission. We've been at this since 2021. March will make 2 years. So I am in favor of getting a work session as soon as possible because it's been a couple of years. The sliding scale, I think that could work, but I'm in favor of keeping our current fee schedule because I believe in giving people options. And right now, this feels like community is losing options. Because some people may come in, they've lost a loved one, and maybe they don't want to fill out all that paperwork and they have the ability to pay. Well, then you use the regular fee schedule. Some may come in and they say, oh, well, I don't have $750, so it's nice that you have the sliding fee schedule. I'll fill out the paperwork. Community deserves options. This doesn't feel like that. How would you feel if your access to town parks, bikeways, or greenways was all of a sudden prioritized through a change in the town code? How would you feel? This is rubbing me in a way I cannot begin to tell you, and it is hurting me to the core that we are sitting here talking about closing a cemetery or limiting use in a cemetery of all places. The dead rest in the cemetery. Oh my God.
Thank you, Barbara.
I'm not finished.
Okay.
I don't know you guys. I understand Mr. Proctor's interest. I applaud your advocacy. But this is wrong.
That land would not be available if
Okay.
I hadn't busted my ass in 1980.
We're not.
But it's not just about you,
Barbara,
Mr. Proctor.
Barbara,
Hey,
Bob.
it's not just about
Bob.
Mr. Proctor.
we're not doing this.
I'm taking him into account in my comments.
I appreciate
And
that.
clearly, I said that.
I'm asking
You
Mr.
are a part of this process.
All right, Mr. Proctor, stop. You're not recognized. Barbara
And-
has the floor, and she's going to address.
called a racist
Councilmember Fushi is going
Who's
to.
called you a racist?
Bob,
Oh,
Please
God.
stop.
So the minorities are calling people racist tonight. What's going on?
Barbara, please address the council with the remainder of your comments. Thank you. I've asked Mr. Proctor to stop.
And I'm the only one that was disturbed when I was giving my comments. So that's inflammatory
asked-
to me, Mayor.
and I have
Just so
asked-
you know.
I have asked Mr. Proctor to stop.
Back to what I was saying about the sliding fee scale. So I believe in options. And so, I mean, I could go with that if we kept the current fee schedule, you know, and give people a choice because people come at low points in their lives. The cemetery improvements, I think they're very much needed. And I would hope that they get the attention that our town parks do through some type of schedule. I cannot support the prioritization with that because it sounds, the word that bothers me in all this is limit, 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 limit. And as far as buying land out in the county to bury people, did y'all know that Black people used to not be able to be buried within the town limits, that they were relegated out into the county? all this feels like is turning. No matter how you look, it has a racial equity component, and that must be captured here. I'm not going to allow it not to be captured. And so I'm in favor of the work session. If you guys vote for the change in the town code, I fully expect it to go to advisory boards. I fully expect that. And I don't see any reason why it shouldn't. I'm not voting for that. Thank you, Mayor.
All right. Ben, thanks for the presentation. There were a couple of items in the agenda packet, and I think you noted a couple of them here, where there was doing some of these things would require some additional staff time or would place a burden on staff to administer a program. For example, the sliding scale, right, would require some more paperwork and some staff time. Can you say a little bit more about that and which of the other items they were that?
Right. So the documentation needed to for individuals to qualify for either these options or the sliding scale, and the intent was, and part of the reason we stopped it at 100% was this would be an option, more of a financial aid opportunity than the revised rate schedule. But this would, if people did opt in, they would have to provide pay stubs or W-2s.
So the idea is kind of similar to, as Barbara was summarizing it, was people could just pay the regular fee that they would normally pay, or if they wanted to take advantage of a sliding scale, they could opt into that.
Correct, yeah.
Okay, gotcha. And I feel like there was at least one of the other items that.
Well, we did note that if we did, if we were to request birth certificates or marriage certificates to prove relation, that would be
okay,
another level. Yeah.
Thank you. So I really appreciate the comments Danny made about finding some movement here toward a compromise solution to the larger question about Westwood. It seems, maybe I'm being overly optimistic about it, but I feel like there's room here to be accommodating the needs of multiple interests. And I'd like for us to be able to talk through that a little bit more, what that might actually look like on the ground. I know that we have, of course, the concept plan that the consultant provided a couple of years ago to the council, which was kind of a full-blown, here's what it would look like if you built it entirely out as like kind of an expanded cemetery, that kind of thing. But that's just one concept, right? I feel like there's room for conversation about what the possibilities are, understanding, as you said, there's been some analysis of the soil and the bedrock and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it would be good for us to make some space for that conversation. So I appreciate the idea of having, whether it's a work session or some kind of meeting where we are brought back some more information. I think both Eleazar and Danny would maybe even have that as an opportunity to see that concept plan, get a formal presentation of it, so that, because that was like a couple of years ago now, right? I am also I'm hesitant about these proposed limitations. And partly because, I found some of what Eleazar shared to be really compelling. But also, I feel like if we are serious about moving this, as Danny said, being action-oriented here, and this has been a conversation for a couple of years, like, if we know that we're running out of plots, chop. Like, let's get moving here, right? Let's have the work session, have the conversation, and make a decision about the future of Zone 4 and Westwood Cemetery. The reason that we're considering options for limiting access to plots is because of this sense of urgency, right? But that's not going to go away. Until we finally have this conversation and make a decision, regardless of whether we institute some limits on access to the plots. So I don't personally feel motivated to put any of these restrictions in place. Let's just have the conversation and make a decision about Westwood. And then that question will be answered about what will be available. So that's kind of how I'm feeling about about the proposed limits on cemetery plots. So there's some, I think there's kind of a range of perspectives we're hearing here on that, although there is a motion on the floor to consider both the work session and then also these changes, potential changes to the town code around priorities. Eleazar, you said you wanted to make a motion about dividing the question.
I did and I do.
Okay. We just agree that we can divide that question up. Okay. Is everyone feeling like the work session would be valuable to address these questions that have been raised tonight about moving toward a compromise? Susan?
I do. I think for me, the important thing would be that the work session was scheduled in a certain a very timely manner.
Sammy had suggested 3 months. I don't know, but I also want to look to the manager and be realistic about that requires staff time and us kind of getting the information that would be needed. I mean,
I think we pulled together either in March or April. We have the parking study needs to come back as well, but we can look at March or April to bring it back.
we could even potentially have both of those on the same. But then the 3-month request would be fine.
Yes.
Work session within 3 months to address these questions and get information from staff about the concept plan and moving us towards some compromise ideas about use of the space. Mr. Manager.
That's a question about the fence at Old Carrboro Cemetery. That is our property, and it seems we want to put our best foot forward that if we're going to keep the fence, we want to fix it. If not, take it down. But to me, it just doesn't look good for the town to have the fence in the shape it's in now.
Yeah.
Don't want to force a decision, but just wondered, could we
Thank you for raising that, because I don't, as I recorded the motion, it didn't actually address the fence question, but it reminds me when you say that I did want to say I support the cemetery improvements as proposed. So that can be maybe a separate motion at some point about that specific issue. So can we? Can I suggest, so we have a motion we're dividing. The first part of that motion, or the first part of the decision here, is about scheduling a work session within 3 months to address questions about the future of Westwood Cemetery.
Well, the motion's to address, to be able to thereafter have what's going to be included in a regular meeting regarding town expansion of Westwood Cemetery, park space, or new rural cemetery. So that would be including the information that we already requested of staff. So those 3 specific things. And it sounds like also including whatever conversation can be gleaned from our partners, Chapel Hill and Orange County, in terms of a shared cemetery
I
potential.
have that written here too, yeah, thank you.
Okay.
So it's a work session to hash out potential town expansion of the cemetery, use as park space, some combination perhaps, and potential for, some rural property locations, and inquiring about interest among other jurisdictions in a future partnership.
Is that an amended motion?
That's the original.
That is the motion.
That's the original.
And we'll get to the next part of it after that.
Okay.
Was it seconded by Susan, I believe? Is that right? Oh, no, Randy. It was Randy.
You know what? I'm going to need to hear that again. This is been a headache.
So the motion, as I understand it, and Sammy can help me with that, is to schedule a work session sometime in the next 3 months to discuss the possibilities related to town expansion of the cemetery, park space, some combination of those things, plus the question about exploring potential land purchase in other parts of in rural area, and inquiring about the potential interest of other local jurisdictions in a partnership on that in the future.
We mentioned Chapel Hill and Orange County as part of the partnership. I wondered about inquiring about Town of Hillsborough as well.
And it's been seconded by Randy. Okay. Any further discussion about that work session?
Because it's information gathering.
Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Matter passes unanimously. So the second part, moved by Sammy, is to adopt the restrictions listed as A, B, C, and D on the slide here. These would be amendments to the town code. And that was also seconded by Randy. Is there any further discussion of that? I think we've mostly said what we wanted to say.
Yeah, I just want to underscore, whatever our outcome or discussion in the work session is part going to be informed by the sense of pressure and time. And I want to underscore the importance of buying ourselves some time. And that's what I think is the value of what this would accomplish. So I just, in an attempt to minimize that urgency and a decision made based on that urgency, I think this is why this would be valuable to do.
Yeah, I get that, Sammy. Maybe I'm seeing the urgency, other side of the urgency coin, which is I feel like we need to that kick in the pants to get the work session done and make a decision.
Yeah, we've been saying that for 2 years.
I know.
So,
Randy.
I just need to ask a question because I think there's a lot of miscommunication about what this really means, and at least I'm seeing that. And so I appreciate that Susan put it in terms of a stopgap between, the number of plots we have now and the potential for expanded space. My question to you all is, does this question about these options, which what I wrote is written a little differently, but is this dependent upon the work session? It's like, because I think Barbara and Eleazar, their questions indicate that in order to get to compromise later, it might be important to get that conversation informed in order to be able to really discuss if any of this makes any sense. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because I don't disagree with Eleazar and Barbara at all, but I understand that these laying this out in order to conserve the number of plots has a flip side to it that is a slippery slope.
I get that. Yeah, I get that. I guess where I'm coming from is that, and then we have to belabor this, is that I share this sense of discomfort with placing limitations on access to our cemetery service. That's really what it comes down for me. Even if it's essentially temporary, whatever, something about that feels potentially problematic. And given that we're committing to having this work session in the next 2 to 3 months and are hopefully committing ourselves to the value, as Danny said, of being action-oriented on this particular topic, since we have been talking about it for 2 years, I'd like to think that we can come to that, whatever that compromise looks like, within a reasonable amount of time, without facing the kind of what you're talking about. But yes, ultimately, these questions could come up again, right? But
Well, that's my point.
right. But anyway, that's where I am. So the motion on the table is to amend the town code to do A, B, C, and D on this. Is there any further discussion of that before we take a vote? Susan?
D, I don't really understand D. If it were limited, I would rather limit it to anybody living within the town of Carrboro, the municipality. And I say that because, these are the taxpayers who are supporting the cemetery. So I feel like if anybody should be prioritized, that should be the group. And I'm not sure what that radius would end up being, but it could be beyond the town the municipality. So I would rather not do D if we're going to be doing these, if we're going to be approving these changes.
So we'll go to Barbara and then Eleazar.
And so I don't know how this vote is going to go. I definitely am not voting for it. I would not vote for it under any circumstances because limiting access to anything to our taxpayers is just wrong to me. But if the majority of you do agree with it, I am going to ask that it go to advisory boards. And that's going to slow it up even more because more eyes need to be on this than just ours. And you're talking about a change in the town code. And I mean, the thing about limiting, period, is just absolutely wrong to me. I don't care what the reason is. You know, you have taxpayers here. You can't predict when death is going to come. You don't know who's going to need a plot when. I mean, we got a crapshoot going here. And I mean, you're just trying to put your finger on something that you cannot put your finger on. You can't. And so that's what I would say. If the majority of you agree, you know, that you guys want this to go forward, I'm going to ask that it go to advisory boards, that it's more time. It's going to go to the Race Equity Commission. And it's just going to be a whole lot more time that we have to look at it, you know, before it comes back again. And so then there's another span of time. So I just wanted to add that, just in case.
Elisar.
This is actually for staff. As I'm sitting here, I'm wondering, of course, we're going to have the work session in 2 to 3 months. Say we decide to expand into the fourth, however that looks like. What is an estimated, and maybe you don't know this and that's completely fine, but what's an estimated timeline if we are to decide as a town council in the next 3 months, let's say 4, to move forward with something on that end? How quickly would it happen? Do we have an estimated amount of time?
So for example, if there were more plots, there would need to be a plotting out of some space, for example.
I do think to have a plan for that space would be needed first. And then once that is adopted, I mean, basically burials could begin immediately, even if other stuff is under construction. So I would just say that it's a matter of time coming to an agreement on a concept plan or a plan to implement.
And would you guess that would be weeks or months?
Well, I mean, considering we have a plan, a concept plan, I guess it would depend on how much that would change. So months, more than likely.
Thank you for that, Councilmember Romaine. Kind of just so that I'm completely clear, let's say we come back in 6 months, we've approved a plan, we've approved what, you know, we had the work session, we've approved our plan. So long as we're doing with the next 6 to let's just go to, like, we're gonna get it to almost the last thing. As long as we do it within the next year, then we can start burying people in the additional plots. Even though we might not have everything in there, but we can start the next day.
Right. I would say traditional plots would be available immediately.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you for that. That's just a question I had as I'm looking at urgency here. And again, if we are committed to action, if we're committed to have this discussion and come up with a plan and come up with what we're going to be doing, we have enough time to do that without limiting, without changing our town code. Not in favor of this. And Mr. Mayor, I would ask that to do a roll call vote of this one, just so that, if that's at all possible. I don't know if I'm out of order, but please let me know.
I would love for us to get to a vote on this.
No.
Danny had his hand up.
I
Danny.
did just want to quickly concretize why I will not be supporting this. Ben was very helpful to refer back to that prior plan, looking at it, adopting essentially just the part of the plan that exists for traditional plots would add 1456 conventional graves, add the 300 or so natural burial plots, talking strictly inbound or in-ground burials. We're talking at the present rate about 26 years worth of inbound or inbound burials. I keep wanting to say in-ground burials. And then when we add the columbarium and cremains that are there, that more than doubles that. So we are not talking about a stopgap. We are not talking about just like a little, like we're not kicking this down the road a couple years. We have it within our power this spring to solve this for 50 years. And I think, to my mind, that is why I will not be supporting the limitation.
You're supporting expansion.
I am supporting expansion, but for now, all that needs to be said is I'm not supporting the limitation.
Mayor, may I, before we get to the vote, really quick? I'm sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I have very strong religious, cultural, and traditions, around in-ground burial, as do other people, black, white, and other. But I have heard Mr. Proctor since he's been coming in here. And I know, as I at least talked to the mayor about, I am more than willing to get at the table and for us to hash something out. I don't see this as no cemetery, pocket park, or pocket park, no cemetery. No, I see us coming together with some type of integration, right? So I remember when the consultant came to talk to us, nobody was interested in that $1 million build out. Nobody. I'm not interested in that, and certainly continuing to listen to community, Mr. Proctor, but also taking into account, the current use of the cemetery. So we dictate how any expansion would go forward, more, less, and I don't see us spending, a whole lot of money, definitely not the full build out. And I feel like there'll be areas where you won't be able to bury people and, all of that. And I just see opportunity here, not just for us to continue the current use, but also to take into account what Mr. Proctor has been advocating for quite some time. I see it as an opportunity.
I'm going to ask that we move toward a vote on the motion that is on the floor, which is specifically about adopting items A through D on this list. That motion, Richard.
Sorry.
Mr. Manager.
I just want to clarify. I think C and D are meant to be an or, not an and. Just point it out.
I'm just saying what the motion on the floor is. Now, I understand.
Don't muddy the waters.
You have added another complexity. Susan pointed out the vagueness about the radius that's proposed in D, right? I mean, so I'm just saying the motion on the floor is adopting A through D, and it's been seconded.
So I will amend my own motion to respond to the point that's very important from the manager that we should choose between C or D. And given Susan's comment, I will move that it be I will amend that it be A, B, and C.
Sammy has amended his motion. Randy, you seconded. Are you comfortable with his amendment?
Well, and I'm going back to what I had here on January 10th, which is not the same as what's here. So I'm not comfortable with B, because B doesn't meet what I had here. I am comfortable with A. I am comfortable with it being Carrboro residents who are taxpayers, because yes, they are paying for this through their taxes.
I just want to, so Sammy has offered an amendment. Do you want to amend, or do you want to remove your second? Withdraw your second.
I amended by taking out B because it says limit the number of cemetery
Accept it.
per person.
Why don't can we withdraw your motion, Sammy, and do it? And if you want to make a new motion,
Okay,
just
the
start.
motion is for
Motion's withdrawn.
town staff to move forward with A and C. Is that what you said? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, and that's seconded by you, Randy?
Question for staff. This is would require a public hearing, right? And automatically process for advisory boards?
No, because it's not the land use ordinance. This is just
regular
town
regular
code.
town code. So just a question of process. It would be public?
No, I'm just saying that's
okay.
correct.
It's just a question. So, when there's a time to refer this to advisory boards, I think that would be valuable given interest by some members of this council. So should I include that in this motion now?
Yes.
So I would like to include
I don't know that it's going to help you any, but yes, I think you should include it in your motion.
Oh, I'm not doing this to gain votes. I agree with
Okay.
the value of that. So yes, that staff include, when it comes to the council, whatever feedback we get specifically from Barbara, you had interest in specific advisory board, I believe.
Yeah, and any
Racial Equity
that you
Commission.
guys recommend.
So what is the one you're recommending?
Race equity.
Race equity, any others?
I mean, I'm not planning to vote for this motion, so I'm not going to
Yeah,
offer
I'm
any.
not gonna vote for it either, but I mean, since he's
So
asking.
let's just get the motion down. The motion is to move forward with numbers, with letters A and C, and to refer the matter to the Racial Equity Commission.
Yes.
So the motion is really to refer this matter to the Racial Equity Commission, and then to bring it back to the town council for a decision. The motion was withdrawn. I can confirm that. So right now, Sammy is working on a new motion. Thank you for making that point, Braxton.
In the back.
So Sammy, can we clarify what your motion is?
Yes.
Motion is for town staff to bring to council potential ordinance that is A and C, includes A and C, and the Racial Equity Commission has an opportunity to provide feedback.
Is there a second for that motion?
But I'm going back to the fact, Wesley, does that include, would A and C include what I?
Okay. I want to be very clear here about where we are in process. Sammy has made a motion about A and C that is shown on the board before us. Not whatever document you may be looking at, Randy, which I'm not sure I'm familiar with. So let's take care of where we are procedurally here. Sammy has made a motion that staff will bring back a decision on A and C after getting feedback from the Racial Equity Commission.
Mr. Mayor,
Is there a second to this motion?
I second the motion and ask we move into a vote.
Motion's been seconded by Eleazar. Is there any further discussion? Say no. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
I heard Sammy and Randy. All opposed, say no.
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 Remainder said no, so the motion does not pass.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to make a motion.
Okay, Eleazar, go ahead.
I would like to move that we recommend staff to move forward with number 3 of the cemetery improvements.
And would you pull that up? 1 second, Barbara. Just 1 second.
I don't have these numbered, but I'm assuming.
Eleazar, can you be more specific?
Yes, apologies for that. I am talking on the list where it says cemetery improvements.
Number 3 is the cemetery improvements.
Yes, number
That's
3
right.
is the cemetery
From the agenda
improvements.
items. Gotcha. So the motion from Eleazar is to approve the proposed cemetery improvements. Let's get a second if there's a second. By Danny, seconded by Danny. Barbara and then Sammy.
Yeah, so really quickly, what I wanted to add, I mentioned earlier about the maintenance, with the town parks. And I don't know about the ability of staff to put it on the cemeteries on a more regular maintenance schedule. I don't know I don't know how often. Seem like they're at Wilson Park almost every day. I don't know. So I don't know how often, the maintenance is done, but I would like to see more maintenance so that the cemeteries just don't look so run down and uncared for. So if you want, the maintenance upkeep.
Do we need some more information? I mean, I'm not sure.
I don't know. Do we need more?
And can you speak to the frequency of maintenance in the cemetery?
Daniel has a comment. What's up, Daniel?
Good evening. Yes, so right now we are doing regular mowing and tree pruning and filling in. The graves themselves are filled in by the funeral homes. They're dug and completed, but we do a monthly site inspection of those areas and provide topsoil grading and grass seed and straw and do litter picking as well on the.
Okay, well, that's good to know, because then it's just a matter of adding in the improvements that are on the table, and everything will be
Correct.
really good.
Yes.
Thank you, Daniel. Danny, you're on the list next, I think. No,
Sammy.
Sammy, I'm sorry.
Could you show us the picture of that fence, please?
Sure, yeah.
Ben? Appreciate it.
Well, this is the fence, and I did have the perimeter.
Well, that one, and let's see the perimeter. That's the whole fence of the perimeter?
Yeah, so the perimeter does border the property line. And just for context, you have the Libicotton Bikeway between the railroad track and the cemetery, and then that's the new arts center.
Yeah.
Adjacent there.
Great, thank you. Yeah, again, I think, it's nice to not have that kind of barrier, and there are many cemeteries I've seen, and this being a green burial site, its last days, I would be for excluding the fence portion. The manager asked whether, we replace it or get rid of it. So for me, obviously, get rid of it. It would be the option, not even keep it. And what that does is it makes it seamless and inviting as opposed to exclusive. So I don't know if there's any support for it, but that's why I would be wanting to do that.
Okay,
Thank you, Sammy. So I just want to remind everybody where we are. So thank you for that comment. There's a motion on the floor.
Friendly amendment.
Okay, to approve the cemetery improvements listed in the agenda materials, and that was also seconded. And Sammy has raised a question about whether the fence should be included in those improvements.
Is it the entire fence, Sammy, or are you talking about the side that faces Libicotton?
Well, perhaps.
I know what you mean when you say.
I mean,
yeah.
for me, it'd be getting rid of all of it because I'm all for like the accessibility of it. But
it's a cemetery.
Right, and what I'm saying is I've been to lots of cemeteries that are open. Like there's one off of Simpson Street that's open. There's the one at UNC. But, folks aren't even uncomfortable with that. It seems like there's that fallen portion, which is the main issue.
Which side is that? Is that the...
Ben can answer that better than me.
The side by the community school.
Okay, so let's...
I mean, the entire fence is in kind of disrepair, but that's the side that's fallen down.
Yeah, okay, so that's a moot point then. It'd be either replacing it or getting rid of it. So I'm for getting rid of it.
Thank you, Sammy. Randy, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I just was going to say that I've heard from folks who have family there, and they definitely want fence because they feel that the property needs to be respected. There's a lot of people who just walk through or in camp or whatever, and they want it. It's sacred ground, and they want to be sure that it's respected. So I would support all of the improvements.
I'm going to ask that we vote on the motion.
We're good. Thank you.
Moved by Eleazar, seconded by Danny. I think, I'm pretty sure it was seconded by Danny, that the council approves of the cemetery improvements. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Matter passes unanimously. Losing my voice, y'all. Okay, so just to recap a little bit here, we approved a motion to hold a work session in the next couple months on possibilities for reaching a compromise on the plan for the remainder of Westwood Cemetery and some other issues that are in the motion. And we approved a motion involving the cemetery improvements. We did not approve any of the proposed amendments to the town code.
Could you all consider that sign with the improvements?
Sure.
Yes.
And a request from Councilmember Romaine about sign maintenance. Thank you, Susan. Okay. Thank you both very much. Ben, thanks for bearing with us here, and Daniel, thanks for being here tonight as well.
Thank you.
Are there, before we adjourn, any matters by council members? Y'all are welcome to.
Just,
Thank you.
Eleazar.
Mr. Mayor, I just meant to say this at the beginning of the meeting, but I've gotten confirmation from the Mexican Consulate General that she will be in Carrboro Friday at 11. We will be meeting, and I encourage anyone on town council who would like to meet her to come to town, here,
Yeah,
Friday at 11.
share that information with us, please, Eleazar?
Will do,
And then we'll make
yes.
sure that there's not a quorum present, just in case.
That makes sense. And when appropriate, I would like to make a motion.
Okay. What's the motion?
To adjourn.
Is there a second? Seconded by Susan. It's moved by Eleazar, seconded by Susan, that we adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Matter passes unanimously.